Hello, everybody.
Hello.
We're back. I know that a few of you, the hashtag Free John is going around a little bit. You okay? He's here. He's okay.
Yeah, you had to unlock the cage in the garage to let me out, so I'm here. Yeah, I thank you for giving me some breakfast this morning too. After letting me out of the cage, don't worry, you don't have to free me. I'm good.
Yeah, we're here, and we have a lot to talk about. Remember when I said that last live and it went 9 hours? I don't think this one will be 9 hours.
It's going to probably be a few hours, though.
It's going to be long. We've got a lot to say.
grab your beverages, grab your popcorn, grab something. Right.
Whatever it is you grab, your tea.
I actually have some coffee this morning.
I've got a bit of everything here laid out. So we've got a lot to talk about. Which I'm sure all of you know. And when I say we, John actually is going to have the most to talk about.
Yeah.
Because I actually, went live for 9 hours, as many of you have pointed out.
Right. So
9 hours and 9 minutes.
So
I did that.
You're going to give me the floor.
I'm going to give you the floor.
You're going to give me the floor today. And I want to talk about what happened, but I want to do it more philosophically and more psychologically. So we're going to get into things like the psychology of stalking. We're going to get into the nature of this conflict, the nature of why people, the different conversations people are having since you released your live, whether you're lying, whether you're telling the truth, right? Like whether you were stalked, is that just free speech? Right? We're going to cover all of that. And we're going to cover that from mainly a psychological perspective, because I am a psychologist. But since
you have your PhD in psychology.
Right, not philosophy. Just to clarify, a PhD is by definition a doctor of philosophy.
Don't worry, I covered that in my life.
So
we're good.
Yeah. So correct. I am a licensed psychologist. I am a clinical and forensic psychologist. And so we're going to approach this largely from a psychological perspective.
And before we begin, I do want to say thank you to everyone for your support. We've actually received thousands of emails and messages from people giving us support. And we just want to say thank you too before we begin.
And just so kind, so much kindness, so much love. Thank you very much. We were able to get through this a lot easier because of the support from our community and our gems. And you guys are amazing, and we can't thank you enough. So
yeah. All right. Take it away.
So let's dive into this analysis. I'm going to start in a fairly peculiar, unexpected place.
Okay.
And I'm going to start with talking about Brad Pitt, the actor.
That is peculiar.
That is, it is a little peculiar, right? So the reason I want to talk about Brad Pitt is because he's an actor in my generation. He's an actor I've followed very closely over the years. He's an actor I've really appreciated. And I've really kind of watched him mature and develop and grow, and that's been somewhat inspirational to me.
Yeah,
so
you do like him. He talks about Brad Pitt.
So let me just say, so I'm going to do a little bit of my own fangirling here, I guess, but let me say that the reason I got to know Brad Pitt was because in 1992, he was in a movie called A River Runs Through It.
Mm-hmm.
A River Runs Through It is one of my favorite movies. It's one of my favorite books. It's a book by Norman MacLean, who was a professor of English literature at the University of Chicago for many years. He wrote this novella about his childhood growing up in Montana and how fly fishing basically saved his life. It's a brilliant book. It's a brilliant movie. Brad Pitt was in the movie. He actually played the somewhat delinquent brother. It was an interesting role that Brad Pitt would kind of reprise many times in his career, but he was very good. And
yeah, he was.
I didn't know who he was at that time. And so I was interested. I'm like, who is this guy, right? When I watch a movie and there's actors I don't know, I'm always interested to kind of figure out who they are, where they came from. So I found that Brad Pitt actually was born and raised in a small town in Oklahoma. He was born in Shawnee, Oklahoma. And I also learned that at least some of his early career, he began in 1987. I didn't know any of his earlier movies. He did a few movies, and then he did work for a soap opera. So the evolution of his career really begins with soap operas. And, when I learned that, I thought, oh, this is interesting, right? Like, you don't see a lot of soap opera actors go on to become mega stars.
True.
I mean, I guess some of them have, but I'm not aware of a lot, right? And so you've got this guy in this major movie. It's produced by Robert Redford. Robert Redford, by the way, in 1992, clearly saw talent in this young actor, because Robert Redford has produced some extraordinary movies over the years. He's been in extraordinary movies. He knows the industry. He knows talent, and he picked out Brad Pitt. So shortly after that, Brad Pitt in 1995 was in a movie called Seven. And he was one of the detectives, and great job. So now my appreciation of this guy is only increasing. In 1996, he did a movie called 12 Monkeys. Many people probably don't know this movie, but I do, because it has to do with mental health, and it gets into everything I love. It's a post-apocalyptic novel. It's got kind of sci-fi. It's about mental health issues. Is he psychotic? Is he not? There's all kinds of philosophical issues raised in this movie, but I don't think a lot of people saw this movie.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but you love Brad Pitt too. So
but I watched this movie, and now, like, he's extraordinary in this movie. Now my appreciation of this guy is continuing to expand. 1999, he does The Fight Club, which is a very controversial movie, gets a lot of attention. But again, I kind of see this guy's journey towards mastery, right? 2004, he does Troy. I'm skipping a lot of movies he's done, by the way. These are just ones. He does the movie Troy, which is about the Iliad. Homer's The Iliad. I love Homer's The Iliad. It's one of my favorite books. It's a brilliant book about war. He does this. That's a risk. It's not particularly a stretch for him in this movie, but he's good. In 2008, he does Benjamin Button. He's nominated for Best Actor. He's nominated for Best Actor by the Academy. In 2011, he does Moneyball. Brilliant. He's brilliant in this movie, right? He's also nominated for Best Actor. 2014, Fury. Again, he's exceptional in this role. 2015, he does The Big Short. Every one of these roles, he sort of has a particular type in these movies, but you also, like, for me, I'm also seeing him expanding his repertoire a little bit, taking some risks, like with Troy, growing as an actor, right? So what's fascinating to me is you got this guy from an area, from Oklahoma, that you never think would become a megastar. He's really committed to his craft. He's really growing, right? And then after The Big Short, there's a bombshell in 2016. And this bombshell is that Angelina Jolie accuses him of abuse.
Yeah. On
a plane specifically, but essentially there's this war between himself and Angelina Jolie. There's two megastars. There's this issue over custody, right? There's all kinds of issues here. There's I believe
it's a bitter divorce.
It's a bitter divorce. I believe there's all kinds of accusations being levied. And before this, by the way, I should point out, like, the paparazzi are all over Brad Pitt wherever he goes.
He's married to Jennifer Aniston.
Married to Jennifer Aniston before.
Cheating scandal.
Right. There's issues about fidelity, right? Like, anything the tabloid can get their hands on, any salacious story about Brad Pitt, they're publishing that, right? I see this stuff, but I don't really pay much attention to it because I don't really care. I want to go to his movies. I'm invested in this guy as an actor and watching him grow and change and master his craft, right?
You're interested in his craft, his art.
Right. So it's interesting because in 2016, and I could be wrong about this, but so these allegations are levied by someone who has tremendous power in Hollywood. And I believe that because of this, there's certainly an attempt to tarnish his reputation, to maybe cancel him, right? Like there's this whole debate about should Brad Pitt be doing movies, right? I'm sure people have mixed feelings about this. He was never formally charged with anything. He was never criminally charged. But after 2016, it does appear that a lot of his roles are lesser roles. It appears that he's doing movies that aren't quite they don't quite have the heft and the reach of movies he's done before. So the reason I read that list of movies prior to is because I don't know exactly what was going behind the scenes. I don't know if the impact of accusations was affecting his ability to get better films. Like I just don't know. And so I'm going to leave us here for a minute. I'm going to leave us with the accusations, the trajectory of his career that apparently seems to stall around 2016, right? And I'm going to dive into something else, which is something that's called psychological essentialism. And psychological essentialism, and there's different kinds of psychological essentialism, but fundamentally psychological essentialism is about the idea that things or people have an underlying reality. So there's something called category essentialism, which is that you might take an attribute or something that of a person, and you're going to generalize from that and make assumptions about who that person is.
Okay.
So in other words, you want to categorize someone. So psychological essentialism is about trying to find some underlying category of reality about a person or a thing. Typically in psychological essentialism, you might take an attribute or a behavior, even just one, and you'll generalize from that to categorize the person in question. So one of the authors one of the psychologists, his name is Paul Bloom. He teaches at Yale. He does research. He wrote a book called How Pleasure Works, where he has some interesting chapters on psychological essentialism. The reason, by the way, he talks about it in terms of pleasure is because he argues strongly that psychological essentialism underlies a lot of our experience of pleasure, in the sense that there are certain things that essentialism helps us with in terms of developing certain desires or motivations for something. So there's another type of psychological essentialism called life force essentialism, which I don't want to get into that now. We'll talk about it later. But for now, I want to talk about psychological essentialism, and I'm going to read. This was Paul Bloom in his book called How Pleasure Works.
Why We Like What We Like. I like the subtitle, so I'm going to throw that out there.
He talks about, there's a subject in one of his studies, it's a 4-year-old. Mm-hmm. And he talks about it. He gives an example of psychological essentialism. And here's what he said. So they interviewed this 4-year-old, and he was describing what he perceived to be a violent playmate. So here's what he says. The 4-year-old. Quote, Gabriel didn't just hurt me. He hurt other kids too. He's a herder. Right, Mom? He's a herder. The child, here's Bloom, the child is presumably stressing that this sort of behavior reflects a deeper aspect of Gabriel's nature. So what Bloom is saying that's of interest here is that if a child is on the playground, let's say we don't know the context, right? Let's say that child is having a really bad day. Let's say his father yelled at him that morning. Let's say his father maybe even pushed him, right? This kid, Gabriel, comes to school and he acts out. He hits another child.
Okay.
Maybe he pushes another child. And this 4-year-old sees it. And his conclusion is that Gabriel is essentially a herder. He's a bad kid and you need to stay away from him. without knowing anything about Gabriel, without knowing Gabriel's story, right? So you're going from this one particular behavior and you're generalizing. And the important point here is that kids as young as 2 and 3 and 4, this is what they do. They start labeling and categorizing behaviors.
Okay. And putting them into categories.
Putting them in categories, trying to oversimplify it, right? So you're essentially seeing, like this 4-year-old, you're seeing one particular behavior, which is this kid Gabriel hitting another kid, apparently. Mm-hmm. We don't know why, right? We don't know the context. We don't know anything about his home life. And then a 4-year-old is drawing the conclusion that that's a bad kid.
In general terms.
In broad terms,
right?
Correct.
It's oversimplifying.
Oversimplified. So what's important here is not only does this happen at a young age, but it solidifies over the course of our lifespan. So in other words, adults are still looking to categorize people. The same way they're looking for a specific instance or behavior to say, that's a herder. So here's an example. Let's say someone writes some private text messages that aren't meant with the expectation of privacy, right? And let's say those messages are part of a group where the culture of that group is to roast other people. That culture of that group is to make fun of other people and to just blow off steam, to vent, right? And let's say that one of those private messages, just one, or maybe a few, they're released publicly. Not to mention the ethical and moral issues about betraying someone's privacy and their friendship and trust. That's a different issue. That's more of a ethical issue, right? But so let's just say that somebody releases a private message or series of private messages, and they get out to certain people. So an example of psychological essentialism is you take one of those messages out of context.
Out of context.
Meant to be private. You take one of those messages and then you develop a sticky label that you apply to the person that wrote that private or those private messages, right? So let's say that some of those messages were snarky, or let's say that some of those messages were edgy. Let's say they were a little biting. Maybe they were sarcastic, right? But they were in the context of a group where that wasn't to be shared. Psychological essentialism suggests that certain people will take those messages that weren't meant to be shared and they will develop categories. They will label people bad. They will label people as being immoral because of that type of behavior, without looking at the context, without considering that person's history, without considering that person's life, right? Like so it's the 4-year-old watching one particular behavior and coming to the conclusion that Gabriel is a hurter, right? And that's a moral judgment, by the way, which is going to take us to the next step of this process. So one of the interesting things about psychological essentialism is that human beings, this is true across all cultures. This research is invariant. This research is as universal as you can get in our field, in the field of psychology. The finding is that human beings, because of psychological essentialism, they believe that we all have more or less what's called a true self. So we have this core self, this true self. Human beings also believe that not only do we have this true self, but this true self is morally virtuous. So this is another part of the finding. So you have a true self that's essential, that self, most people believe that self in themselves and others is morally virtuous. And then we get to another piece of this puzzle. So not only do people see a true self that's morally virtuous, but they believe, because of this, they believe, human beings across all cultures believe that there's an intrinsic goodness to them. And they also believe there's an intrinsic goodness in the groups that they participate in or involved in. So I'm going to read from a book here. I'm going to read the psychologist Keith Payne, who summarizes this point.
What's this book?
It's called Good Reasonable People.
Okay.
Keith Payne is a psychologist at the University of North Carolina. He's done a lot of research on social psychology. Keith Payne calls these assumptions, quote, the psychological bottom line. The psychological bottom line. What that means is Payne is saying that universally across all cultures, human beings always come back to the psychological bottom line. I'm going to read what he says. This is on page 41. The first non-negotiable principle is that I am a good and reasonable person. The second principle is that, quote, my groups are good and reasonable people. He goes on. When the psychological immune system, that means defense mechanism, that's what researchers call it.
Okay, defense mechanism.
When the psychological immune system protects us from threats, it does it by finding a way to make everything else add up to the psychological bottom line. In other words, human beings, we think that there's a true self, that it's moral and it's good, and we will do everything in our power to make sure that people perceive us as good, or to ostracize those people that we don't see as good. So in other words, it's fundamentally human beings. This idea of morality is fundamentally human beings. It's a part of our makeup. It's how people see other human beings, right? I'm going to read, this is from an article by Julian de Freitas.
Okay.
Julian de Freitas teaches at Harvard. He's done a huge amount of, he's a psychologist at Harvard. He's done a huge amount of research on this idea of what he calls the good true self.
This is from Cognitive Science. And
Cognitive Science.
Multidisciplinary
2017, volume 42. I'm just reading from the abstract. Quote, here's how he summarizes it. Quote, people sometimes explain behavior by appealing to an essentialist concept of the self, often referred to as the true self. Existing studies suggest that people tend to believe that the true self is morally virtuous. That is, that deep inside, every person is motivated to behave in morally good ways. So I'm trying to establish the fact here that human beings see themselves as moral creatures. We operate on moral ground typically, and that's how we evaluate other people, right? That's how we kind of live our lives. I'm going to go further with this idea. So there's been some interesting research by Strominger and Nichols. This is from an article called Neurodegeneration and Identity. It is 2015 from Psychological Science. What they did in this study is they looked at a bunch of people that had traumatic brain injuries or dementia, and they were trying to evaluate that when somebody is basically losing their identity because of dementia, when they're losing their memory, do other human beings evaluate them in terms of memory loss or some other way?
Yeah.
And incredibly, what they found, what they discovered is that as long as the person perceived some type of moral foundation that's still, or moral part of the person, foundation that still existed in the person, they then saw that person as still being the same. If they had no memory of who they were, and there was no ability for the person with the dementia to still hold on to any type of moral principles or moral behaviors, then they didn't see that as the same person. So in other words, what they found was it wasn't memory that determined whether you see someone with dementia or a brain injury in the same way. It was morality. It was morals.
That's
and again,
how strong.
That's how strong this is, right?
That's how we are judging.
So let's go back.
We're assessing.
I'm going to just quote from this article, Neurodegeneration and Identity. Quote, this is from page 1477. Quote, the current results support the essential moral self hypothesis. As long as core moral capabilities are preserved, perceived identity remains largely intact. So in other words, as long as one's core moral capabilities are preserved, even if you have brain injury, memory loss, dementia, right? Any type of dementia, as long as people perceive you have moral capabilities, they still believe it's you. They still believe it's your identity.
Okay.
Let's go a step further with this idea. There's a fascinating study from Hochstedler et al. From 2009. The title of this article is "That's Not Who I Am: How Offenders Commit Violent Acts and Reject Authentically Violent Selves." I think the title speaks for itself. The finding of the story is that even the most hardened violent criminals go to extreme lengths to see themselves as good, reasonable people. It goes back to Paine's fundamental psychological principle.
Yeah.
I'm going to read here. I'm going to read a little bit from the study just to make this point, page 510. Quote, "The assessment of a nonviolent character is a foundation or core belief upon which inmates' rationalizations were constructed. With it, violence is framed as transient and situational and thus could not be accurately viewed as a trait or defect of the offender.
Okay.
By relying on a variety of situational justifications for their violence, offenders resisted internal and external labels of being violent, at least as they defined it. They engaged in violence, but distanced themselves from it by pointing to situations or circumstances that caused their actions." So, what does this mean?
Yeah. Tell us what
It means that there's this deep propensity for human beings to see others as moral, to judge them as moral, and to see themselves as good, and to judge others as either good or bad, right? In other words, I guess the way to put this is the fundamental theater in which human beings operate, which is the world, let's call it the theater, I guess, because we all have different roles, is a morality play. We live, most of us, because we put so much emphasis on morality, we essentially live in a morality play in our daily lives all the time. And this has to do with, you see this everywhere, right? People judging others, people gossiping, people spreading rumors.
sounds like Chad Daybell's light or dark scale, if I'm going to be honest.
Well, that's
If
part
you know,
of this.
you know.
That's right. That's part of this.
You're either good or you're bad.
So let's get back to Brad Pitt. So now that I've talked about these ideas of what's called the essential moral self, let's get back to Brad Pitt.
Okay.
So Brad Pitt has this allegation.
I think Brad's cute, but
yeah, that's
and
fine.
I think he's a great actor.
That's fine. Yeah.
But I haven't assessed him the way you have. I know you've always loved Brad Pitt and his craft.
Let's go back to Brad Pitt. So, and I don't want to minimize what happened, right? Like, if in fact he did abuse or right, that's appalling. I'm obviously never.
We don't know what happened.
We don't know. I'm never going to support that, right? But the point is, back in 2016 when this happened, what you get in these types of situations is you get this large kind of morality played. What you get, the best way I could describe it is that people become involved in what I would call a moral crusade.
Mm-hmm.
And the moral crusade is, I think the moral crusade exists mainly because humans are very prone to making moral judgments. And as I just said, and when they perceive someone as bad, or when someone is labeled as bad, the goal ultimately is to ostracize them from the group or groups, right? And so that, in a sense, that is in essence is an attempt to cancel someone. You label someone bad, you get them ostracized from groups, you ruin their reputation, right? Part of that was going on with Brad Pitt. And you might say, okay, so who cares? Why? Let's say this is a moral crusade that people are trying to paint Brad Pitt as evil, so he never works again in Hollywood. They're trying to get him canceled, right?
Right.
To punish him for his so-called
moral
shortfallings. Moral shortcomings. And I think there's something really interesting here that we need to consider that applies to our situation. And this is where this is important. The problem Angelina Jolie had in trying to make this a moral crusade was that Brad Pitt has this body of work, which is indisputably good, right? He's got this body of work, and he's becoming an actor that's mastering his craft. That's why I'm interested in the guy. Like, I love watching people master a craft.
You always say, make good art.
Right. I love excellence, right? And so I strive for that myself.
Says the valedictorian who got accepted to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and Columbia, and, said no to most of them. Sorry. I'm going to brag. But he's not a real psychologist, guys. Just pretend.
I love people.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I love people that strive for excellence. I see Brad Pitt as fitting that mold, right? And so when she shifts this debate into makes it a moral crusade, there's a big problem. And that problem is that Brad Pitt's body of work and the quality of his work are indisputably good. I mean, you know what? Some critics may disagree with me. I'm sure there's critics that hate Brad Pitt. They think he's a hacked actor, but I'm not one of those, right? And so if the goal is to cancel Brad Pitt, and you're a fan of Brad Pitt, like I am, my response to that was, okay, maybe he's got some problems in his personal life. Maybe whatever, I'm not excusing it. Maybe he feels overwhelmed by having all these kids, a massive career, be one of the biggest stars in the world. Like you and I
think he's admitted to alcoholism. He's struggling with addiction.
Right.
He's certainly not perfect. He's got some issues.
You and I are.
His life is messy.
You and I are such, whatever the celebrity scale is, you and I are like a pittance compared to Brad Pitt, right? I can't even imagine.
Yeah, we're not a thing.
I can't even imagine the stress and expectations and criticism this guy has to deal with, right? Like, I don't think any of us can imagine that. I can't imagine that for Taylor Swift, like some of the biggest stars in the world. The Rock, I don't know how they handle all this stuff.
I don't either.
I really don't, right? So like
YouTube's enough for me.
So my thing is, so this is happening, there's stuff before about affairs, and I'm just like, the guy does good work. I love the fact that this guy is trying to master his craft, right? What I care about is the quality of his work.
His art, his craft.
The quality of his work. And so I think it's interesting that in our current, it's interesting that like Brad Pitt being accused of abuse in 2016, that the situation you're in, this whole smear campaign from the start, that every bit of this is about a moral referendum on you and your character. Every bit of this is become a moral crusade, right? And what I find fascinating about that is that this debate is not happening in the realm of, oh, what's the quality of Lauren's work? What's the quality of Hidden True Crime's work, right? Like, I could argue with Brad Pitt, for example, that this attempt to shift the debate to this moral crusade, to this moral issue, but it's certainly an attempt to shift the debate away from his work as an artist and an actor to something else, to something about his character, to something about his morals and his right. And the question is, so, and by the way, with you, You weren't accused. You've never done anything like that ever. Like, you've never done anything wrong.
Well, my eyebrows are a sin.
Right.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, you may have to shave those. We've received.
And I love myself some Botox. Keep going.
We've received some emails. I think there's. I want to read a comment we received by Pinata Samurai. I love that name, by the way. Thanks, Pinata Samurai.
This is a comment.
This is a comment that I love that summarizes this whole thing up. We received a brilliant text a brilliant message in comments from one of our viewers. And here's what Pinata Samurai said.
Love the name, by the way.
I know. Pinata Samurai. It's so great. Next time I go to a pinata party with our son, I'm going to call myself Pinata Samurai. Quote, even if you were the devil himself, I'd still watch you. You're brilliant at what you do. You and your husband both. Right. And so the reason that's relevant.
I'm not the devil.
The reason that's relevant. I know you're not the devil. It's making a point. Obviously, you're not the devil. Only when you lock me in my cage in the garage. The reason why that's brilliant is because I think it really gets to the core of this debate, just like Brad Pitt, right? Why isn't anybody debating this on the terrain of our work? Why is this being litigated as a moral referendum, right? And there's another question in here. If you're going to engage in a moral crusade, which is what all the people in this smear campaign have done, if you're going to do that, you're going to have some moral authority, right? The other part of engaging in a moral crusade is you need probably some bank account, some credits, some moral credits to bolster your position, right? And think about that with your situation, right? Like, does someone who was kicked out of the Daybell trial for violating a number of court regulations multiple times, does that person have moral authority to comment on your character?
I'm not going to say.
How about this? Somebody who took your phone without your consent and went through your phone and the financials that were in your phone. This person knew that they were never to access our financials. That's our business. That person gets in your phone, looks at your financials without your consent. Does that person have the moral authority to engage in a moral crusade to ruin you? Or how about this? Someone who makes comments on a TikTok about your brother in a coma and how you want to non-consensually try to obtain your brother's sperm. Does that person have the moral authority to engage in a crusade, a moral crusade to ruin your character? Or how about this? Somebody who follows you around the courthouse, videotaping you, video recording you, constantly getting in your face, and because of that type of behavior, is not allowed to attend the memorial service that you put on. You helped organize. I
participated in helping organize. My dear friend actually.
Does that person have the moral authority to engage in this moral crusade against you, right? So my point is that if you're going to engage in a moral crusade, you better be squeaky clean. And my point is that we all have flaws.
You're getting to the parable in the Bible, whoever hasn't sinned, cast the first stone. It's a good one.
We all have flaws. We all have imperfections. And so people make mistakes. You've made some mistakes here. You've acknowledged that. The question is that if you're going to engage in this type of moral crusade, that at some level you're going to need some moral authority to do that. And what does that even mean? I mean, I could talk for the next 5 hours about what moral authority means. We could talk about morality. I won't. I'll just say this.
Morality to everyone is different, right? What is moral and what isn't.
I'll just say this,
different to each person.
That moral authority is derived from a couple of places. It's derived from your behavior, and it's derived from the community in which that behavior occurs, right? You get moral authority because the community confers it on you for either good or bad behavior, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that everyone involved in the smear campaign is claiming this moral high ground, and they're claiming this moral authority to engage in this smear campaign and bullying and stalking against you because they're morally correct, right? Because they're right. They're going to show, they're desperately trying to show that you've done something wrong, that you're a bad person, and you should be canceled.
Yeah, well, and how about also someone is either all good or all bad? I mean, that's what you were saying at the beginning of this. That
gets into psychological essentialism. Okay. Exactly.
Yeah, psychological essentialism.
So it's like the fourth grader. It's like the fourth grader
or
watching
the 4-year-old.
I mean, I'm sorry, I meant the 4.
Yeah, even worse.
It's like the 4-year-old watching a little child punch another kid. Maybe the Gabriel had a bad day, and then coming to the conclusion that's a herder. This is a version of that. And by the way, part of the reason that's important is because there is a tremendous amount of immaturity here, right? Like, these smear people are engaged. We've seen so many comments about this, that how childish this is, how middle schoolish this is, right? And it's almost like you're taking that 4-year-old and you're showing the 4-year-old one text that may have been a little snarky, and the 4-year-old's coming to the conclusion, oh, that's a herder, right? It's a similar dynamic.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of issues here that are worth talking about. One is that there's a deliberate attempt here, I think, to shift this debate away from your work, our work, the quality of our work. Mm-hmm. Like, technically, Brad Pitt, I don't really care what's going on in his personal life. I'm just interested in his mastery of acting and his journey towards mastery. And I've been invested in that for a long time. As a matter of fact, I have a quote from a critic. This is recently. So Brad Pitt did a recent movie called F1, which I loved, by the way. I thought he was great. I mean, it wasn't much of a stretch for him. It was probably a very easy role, but he was fantastic. I love the movie. It was exciting. Anyway, there's a critic. Her name is Angelica Bastien. She apparently does some movie reviews for The Vulture.
Okay.
And I guess part of the debate that was going on with F1 was around this idea of, well, what if he's an abuser? Should we give any credence to this movie or to Brad Pitt as an actor? Like, shouldn't we it was about canceling him, essentially. And here's what she said.
Okay.
She said, quote, "It isn't that people don't believe what happened to Jolie on that plane. It's just that they don't care." And why is that important? Because what this critic is saying is the people understand that the humans make mistakes. Humans are imperfect. And if you want to make this into a moral crusade, then in many ways you're really negating the important point, which is that Brad Pitt is an artist who creates art. He's an actor who acts. Maybe that's the realm where he should be evaluated. Maybe that's what the critic's saying. Maybe we should pay attention to his role in this movie and whether the movie is good and how well he's acting, how well he acted in it, rather than litigating something from 2016, which, although potentially horrible, it doesn't affect his acting. I mean, it may have. It probably affected him psychologically. I'm sure he was hurt by it, maybe. I don't know. I presume. And so here with you, with us, this whole smear campaign has been a referendum on your character. It's been a referendum. It's been a moral referendum on you and who you are, rather than a critique or analysis of your work.
Yeah.
And so I'm fascinated by that, because it's hard not to say that the reason that debate, the reason why this has nothing to do with your work, although I will say we have gotten a lot of emails from people that are very praiseworthy of our work and that see this for what they see, that you've done nothing wrong. And even if you made a few mistakes, they're willing to forgive you because, as Pinata Samurai said, she loves your work, right? I'm going to read a message we just got today.
Okay.
I'm not going to say the name because I don't know if I'm authorized, but she says, quote, "Hello, I want to tell you how much I appreciate the quality, credibility, and positive nature of your work. You don't deserve the abuse you're experiencing." I love that, because it's the same thing that Pinata Samurai is saying. It's the same thing that Brad Pitt's movie critic is saying. It's, if you reframe this as a moral crusade and not about the quality of your work, it's easier to win to them, to the smear people. It's easier to win that argument because human beings are drawn to that moral crusade. They're drawn into that morality play. For me, I'm less interested in his biography and I'm more interested in his actual art.
Yeah.
And I want to evaluate him on that terrain.
Fair.
Rather than in terms of morality, right? But it shows that human beings have this knee-jerk reaction to go after moral issues.
Yeah.
In fact, like this whole idea of cancel culture, this whole idea of harming people on the internet is based on this idea of humans being moral creatures on moral crusades, trying to assert their moral superiority.
Yeah.
With or without, most often without moral authority, but a moral authority is a tricky issue. So I don't want to get into that too much. I mean, because, ironically, I think some of the people on the smear campaign would say that their moral authority comes from God.
Yeah.
And so I think that in this smear campaign, I think there's a religious component, right? So if you have God on your side and you're right, so being right in this case means that they're morally superior, and they're right because they're trying to show that you are immoral and that you have poor character and therefore you should be canceled. And they're trying to show that with evidence that's flimsy at best, or with evidence that, with evidence that you've seen and apologized for. I mean,
yeah.
But I just think, that's problematic. So let's take it a step further. So people are going to say, "Oh, what? So what? All right." So people people engage in this moral crusade, and people see themselves as good fundamentally and moral, blah blah blah. Who cares, right? So okay, so Brad Pitt, may have done this abusive thing. Maybe some people think they should cancel him for that. Maybe they don't care about his work, right? Like, so people are saying, maybe, all right, so they're going after you for being immoral or whatever. People are trying to cancel you. Why should we care?
And I want to point out, I've canceled businesses because their values don't adhere to mine. I mean, that's fair, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, right. If people
not canceled, not like gone on and tried to start a smear campaign, but learned maybe a business isn't one I want to support.
I'm not suggesting.
And if people feel that about us, I get it.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm not saying. I'm pointing out the disparity between focusing almost exclusively on moral issues,
right,
versus ignoring the work.
Right.
That if you see someone as deeply immoral and there's evidence of that, not preconceived notions of it,
mm-hmm.
then yeah, I think sure, people have the right to judge things as being immoral and not consistent with their values, and then not caring, like not paying attention to someone's work. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's certain people like me, there might be moral questions around Brad Pitt, but it doesn't really affect me. I'm not really interested in his personal life.
For you, it's about his craft.
His work, right. Now, there might be some people that say, oh my gosh, I'm never going to see another movie by him. That's their choice.
Yeah, that's fine. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. There's some businesses I thought, I don't want to, support that business because maybe I found out their founder isn't someone who holds my, same beliefs, and then I'll end up actually supporting them because they make a good chicken sandwich. So it happens.
So the next step in this is if humans are essentially moral creatures and that's how we see the world and evaluate them, we all want to be good. The question is, one of the questions that arises from that is, how do we maintain that? So when there's threats to our moral character, how do we maintain that perspective? How do we see ourselves as good? And the answer is there's something called the cognitive response principle.
Okay.
The cognitive response principle basically says that any information you get is only going to confirm whatever beliefs or perspectives you have. So in other words, you can get information that contradicts your identity or your view of the world, and you're going to disregard it. You don't care, right? Yeah. Because what you're going to do, the cognitive response principle basically says that all persuasion is self-persuasion, meaning you're going to get that information, you're going to come up with a lot of reasons why it's wrong, even though it's correct. Somebody gives you evidence of something, you're going to come up with a lot of reasons about why that's wrong and why you're still a good person. There's also something we talk about all the time, which is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is you take evidence or information, you find the parts that confirm your view, you disregard the parts that don't.
Right.
And all of a sudden, you still believe the same thing.
Correct.
So part of this is that if you're that 4-year-old kid who thinks that Gabriel's a herter, and let's say that kid grows up with Gabriel. Let's say he lives in the same neighborhood. That kid at 4 thinks Gabriel's a herder. Every bit of information that 4-year-old gets from there on out until they're adults, he could use to either confirm that view, or he could get information that Gabriel, in fact, is a really good kid. He's in the Boy Scouts. But you might take, let's say, he would take that information and disregard it and tell you why Gabriel is still such a bad kid.
Because you could also say, oh, he's in the Boy Scouts, not good. Depending on how you see the Boy Scouts or how you want to see Gabriel, to your point.
I'm using that. Yeah, that's true.
But it's that was actually a great example. Depending on how you want to see this, good or bad, is how you'll connect the dots to confirm your bias to Gabriel or to create a new view.
Right. And this is important because if people are engaged in a smear campaign and they get information that contradicts their belief, they're going to ignore it.
Correct.
They're going to stand their moral ground. They're going to stay with their moral superiority. They're going to remain in their self-righteous perspective because they have a moral authority.
They'll twist the evidence. They'll edit the evidence.
They'll edit it. They'll twist it. They're going to show you
the evidence out of context.
Right. They're going to show you whatever they want to show you because of confirmation bias and the cognitive response principle. So no matter what information you give them, it's not going to move the needle. It's not going to impact their perspective that you're a bad person and you're immoral. And they have to fight that battle on that moral terrain, because more than likely it's going to be much more difficult to fight it on the terrain of content and the quality of content.
Yeah.
But let's move on. So that's important to know, because this is why when evidence comes out to the contrary, like you and I have gotten we've gotten a lot of feedback from people that's been very positive about creators we've helped, about victims we've helped. They've reached, all these people have reached out to us, right? That contradicts their narrative.
Right.
And so therefore, that's information. That's evidence that contradicts their narrative about how immoral you are. Therefore, they're going to use confirmation bias, and they're going to use cognitive response principle to negate or deny or minimize or delete all of that information that could change their perspective, right? That's how you continue on a smear campaign.
Yeah.
You put it on moral terrain, you disengage from any contrary evidence, and that's how you keep going. In fact, that's how you escalate. But let's take the next step in this analysis, and this is a step I love. There's something called the fundamental attribution error.
Okay.
The fundamental attribution error is probably one of the fundamental principles of psychology. It's been proven over and over again by research.
Okay.
It's if there's such thing as a law in the field of psychology, this would be close to that.
Okay.
Another law. There's a psychologist recently deceased, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is his name. He used to teach at the University of Chicago. He taught flow. He wrote about flow. He's the kind of the father of that. He believed that Lord Acton's law was also a similar law. Lord Acton's law, I'm just throwing this out there to give you an example of another law in psychology. Lord Acton's law says that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Absolute power
corrupts
absolutely.
So Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi believed that was a law. This is another, what I would consider to be close to a law of human behavior. Fundamental attribution error. So what is the fundamental attribution error says that human beings overestimate the importance of personality in explaining behavior, as opposed to the situation. So let me repeat that human beings, whenever something occurs, human beings prefer to explain events in terms of personality rather than the situation. So the evidence for the fundamental attribution error, for example, would be the famous Milgram experiments where you shock people because the experimenter is in the position of an authority figure wearing a lab coat, and he says, basically, shock this person until they're screaming in pain, and subjects do it. They do it because of the situation, not because they're bad people.
Yeah.
There's the Stanford prison experiments where people are put in the context of a prison and they start acting out like abusive prison guards. Not because they're bad people, but because the prison guards are given too much authority, right? There's the Ash experiments that I've talked about on our Patreon, where groups are shown lines of different magnitudes. They're given a reference line and they're shown 3 lines of different magnitudes, and members in the group are Confederates. And they're told, hey, look, this is clear cut. There's one line that matches the 3, but we want the Confederates to say that this line is actually the wrong line. In other words, to say that this longer line is a shorter one, and to get people in that group to believe it. And you know what? 75% of the time, one of the group members believes that the wrong line is the right line simply because of group peer pressure. Those are all examples of where the situation, it's not because these people have defective personalities.
No. Group peer pressure. Group peer pressure.
So here's where the fundamental attribution error is really important in terms of this smear campaign.
Okay.
I can't stress this enough. That almost every person involved in this smear campaign talked about you positively.
Yeah.
They
That's
all
true.
talked about you in a positive light
That's true.
before you rejected them, before there was a change.
Some of them rejected me too.
Yeah. But the point is that you were essentially positive, and then certain circumstances changed it, and all of a sudden you became evil, right? How is that relevant? Because they saw your personality as good. They saw you as kind. We have messages from people proving this.
Yeah.
Until their friendship with you or their relationship with you changed. And then all of a sudden they became haters, you became bad, right? It's the fundamental attribution error. Do you just go from saying, oh, you know what? This person is so nice. One of these people that is no longer with us, she said, oh, John and Lauren are angels. All right. One of these people said, oh, Lauren is so kind.
Someone just sent us, we've been getting a lot of messages, by the way, from people
Yeah.
that know people, and thank you. Someone else sent us a message from somebody that said they are just as nice as in person as they are on their podcast. And now
you're evil. So the issue is, this explains it. This law of psychology, the fundamental attribution error explains it. Is it because you have a defective personality and you're evil and immoral? No. It's the fact that the situation changed. How did it change? Because you either changed their employment, you changed your relationship with them, maybe you had a falling out in your friendship. It wasn't that your personality changed, it's that their status with you changed. And because that status changed, they hate you. So, why is this important? Because all the evidence here suggests that these people all saw you as good and moral and virtuous until something happened. They either rejected you, you rejected them, the friendship changed, right?
the situation changed.
The situation changed. And so in that sense, it's really no different than the Milgram experiments, in the sense that the situation is being guided by an authority figure. That's how you get the subjects to shock people, right? It's not that the people performing the shock treatments change their personalities. It's that the situation changed. And so the most compelling evidence and most compelling argument here is you didn't change.
Thank you.
I know you didn't change.
Someone actually tried to tell me that I'd changed. Thank you.
You didn't change at all. The situation changed. Their status and relationship with you changed. That's it. You're the same person.
Thanks. Still drive you crazy. I can still be annoying.
Yeah, right. You can be annoying, but you know what? I'm an adult. I can handle being called annoying or having people saying they're annoying. Like, that's what mature adults do. They can handle being called annoying. You can call me annoying too. You do all the time. So
you can be really annoying.
That's what grown-ups do. That's what mature people do. They can handle being labeled something.
Yeah.
So we're covering a lot of terrain here. Fundamental attribution error is proof that you're not the one who changed. The relationship changed. You're the same person. That doesn't mean you're without flaws. Doesn't mean that you're imperfect. But
I'm not perfect. I'm
right.
imperfect.
So let's stay with this idea of morality, though. So with you, the fundamental attribution error basically says that you went from being a good, virtuous, moral person, and then your relationship with these people changed, and all of a sudden you're immoral, right? You're a defective character. That's the argument. It's ridiculous because every single one of these people had a change in relationship status with you, and every single one of them turned against you because of it, not because you changed. And so obviously, what does that suggest? That's envy. That's envy. We'll talk about that more later. But before we do, people still might be saying, all right, whatever, John, like, people are moral creatures. They want to think they're good. They don't change their perspective of themselves. Fundamental attribution error. Okay, so what? This is the part, I think, that's important, because now we're going to get into why there are risks here and why this is a real problem. A lot of people, maybe not a lot, I'm sorry, there's some chatter out there that this is just like a big cat fight, right? This is just like a bunch of mean girls going at it. There's no victimization. There's no risk of violence, right? This is just all overblown. I'm going to show you now why that's not true. There's something, I'm going to read from a book here.
In other words, you're saying that I don't have a stalker and that I did a 9-hour live crying about a cat fight.
You were faking the whole thing and you were crying about a cat fight.
Or I'm dramatic. And
we'll get to that in a little bit. There's a couple of psychologists, Alan Fisk and Tage Rye. They wrote a book called Virtuous Violence. They've done a lot of research on this, by the way, so there's empirical support for this theory.
Okay.
But I'm going to read a little bit from their book and start explaining why this moral crusade and this desire for certain party, this self-righteous moral, referendum on you is important. So here we go. Most violence, this is according to the theory by Fisk and Ray, most violence is morally motivated. People do not simply justify or excuse their violent actions after the fact. At the moment they act, people intend to cause harm or death to someone they feel should suffer or die. That is, people are impelled to violence when they feel that to regulate certain social relationships, imposing suffering or death is necessary, natural, legitimate, desirable, condoned, admired, and ethically gratifying. In short, most violence is the exercise of moral rights and obligations. Working within the framework of a relational models theory, our thesis is that people are morally motivated to do violence to create, conduct, protect, redress, terminate, or mourn social relationships with the victim or with others. We call our theory virtuous violence theory. So why is this important? It's important because there's a lot of evidence suggesting, I'm going to read a line in here that I think is really critical. In short, most violence is the exercise of moral rights and obligations, right? The reason this is important is because virtuous violence theory completely applies to your situation in the sense that the people engaging in this smear campaign feel morally justified. They feel like their moral rights were violated and they want retribution.
One of them reposted on her TikTok that we should bring back public shaming. That's kind of what you're...
Exactly.
Which is the Salem witch trials too. I mean, I guess a lot of people feel that way. Yeah, clearly.
But the larger point here is that there's research supporting this, and that if you engage in kind of this extreme moral crusade against someone, the natural and logical conclusion to that is harm or death. And if you think about the smear campaign, so the stalker who began the TikTok, she says quite clearly that her goal is to burn the kingdom down, right? It's clear that her goal is not only harm, reputational harm, emotional harm, psychological harm, but the harm that she really wants to affect is to ruin you and ruin your life and burn the whole kingdom down, right? The goal. So what that's implying is that she won't stop until that harm is executed and complete. So if she burns the kingdom down, then she feels morally vindicated. Or if there's a death, if someone harms themselves or someone harms you, then the game's over. She's morally vindicated. Here's the problem. Here's the risk. This is why this is so risky and so important, because these people, these self-righteous, morally superior people, they want moral vindication, and they're not going to stop until they get moral vindication. And the way they get moral vindication, the way this game ends, is either you're dead or you're completely ruined. That's it. And that, by the way, is malicious intent. One of the things about stalking, and we're going to talk about the definition of stalking in a little bit, there has to be malicious intent. There has to be some intent to cause harm. You have it in spades here. When someone says that they want to burn your kingdom down, when they want to expose you, when they want to harm you,
yeah,
they feel justified in doing it. They feel, as virtuous violence theory would predict, they feel like most violence is the exercise of moral rights and obligations. That's exactly what this is. They're exercising in their mind their moral rights and obligations because you harm them, because you're immoral, because you're a bad person, and they will not stop until their goal is met, which is to ruin you or have you end up dead. That's the goal. Let me continue with I'm going to read another part of this book that's so important. Same book, Virtuous Violence, same authors. This is page 17. Quote, virtuous violence theory proposes that the perpetrator intends to harm or kill in order to constitute a social relationship, to make it correspond with a prescriptive model of what the relationship ought to be, what it must be made to be. In other words, people engage in virtuous violence to get people to conform, and they want them to conform to their perception of a prescriptive model or an ideal of what they think the relationship should be.
Yeah.
That's
conformity.
That's all over this. That's all over this situation. They're evaluating you. And again, this gets to the question of moral authority. They're evaluating you against an ideal of loyalty and conformity and acquiescence and fitting in above all else. What they're not doing is they're not evaluating against, they're not evaluating against the criteria of quality work. Right. We talked about, they're not evaluating you against the criteria of creativity. They're not evaluating you against the criteria of complexity. because they're not allowing you to be complex.
No, I need to conform.
You need to conform, right? If you reject them, you're not conforming. You're not loyal. Like one of the themes that you see throughout this entire TikTok is, oh, she's a bad friend. I'm going to punish her for being a bad friend. She doesn't know what a friendship is. That's the ideal. That's the reason why there's a real risk of violence here is because number one, this can escalate so easily. And number two, you don't fit that ideal. You never did. You're not conforming to this very narrow, rigid perspective that they want you to fit into.
Of what a friend is and their friend. And yeah.
That makes this, by the way, I mentioned a moral crusade. That makes this an ideological battle in the sense that the fight here is, and to them, the fight here is good versus evil or good versus bad. They're good, you're evil. And because of that, the only possible way out of this is total ruination of you or death. I'm going to read a quick quote here, making this point. This is from a book called Human Destructiveness by Anthony Storr. Anthony Storr.
What? Humans destructive? No.
Anthony Storr is a brilliant British psychiatrist. He's written a lot on a lot of topics. He's writing here about, obviously, human aggression and destructiveness. Here's Anthony Storr, page 142. My dogma is, quote, my dogma is that all dogma is suspect. And it seems to me that most of the harm in the world is done by those who are dogmatically certain that they are right. For being absolutely right means that those who disagree are absolutely wrong. Those who are absolutely wrong are, of course, dangerous to society and must be restrained or eliminated. That is the beginning of the road to the torture chamber and the gas oven.
Wow.
Unquote. That's what we're talking about. So when people say, oh, gee, this is just Mean Girls, this is just a stupid cat fight, they don't understand the stakes here. They don't understand what's going on. They don't understand that to the people in the smear campaign, this is a moral crusade that is reducing you to someone or something that's subhuman that needs to be destroyed. This is an ideological war against you. And by the way, many of the people in the smear campaign that we have not named are continuing. They have continued. Just so you know, I'm not going to talk about it more than that. Let's talk about some other risks. We will get into defining stalking in a minute, and we'll get into the psychology of stalking in a minute. But as long as we're talking about risks, I want to bring up some real risks here. People say, oh my gosh, why would she get a restraining order if this is just a cat fight among mean girls? Nothing's going to happen. This is nothing, right? No, virtuous violence theory suggests otherwise. And if you do, as I've done, if you do some of the stalking risk assessments, the risks are considerable.
And this is what he does is he assesses and evaluates offenders. So this is what you do with your philosophy.
We know,
doctorate. Just kidding, psychology.
There's so many examples of when you engage with people on a moral crusade and your goal is to dehumanize them, and you see it as a moral issue, it will escalate. And that was a concern you and I had. If people say, oh my God, this stalking order is so frivolous, no, it's not. And this is why. Because you and I were trying to prevent someone landing at our door with a gun. We did not want to get to that point. And
somebody has now threatened us with that online.
Yes.
Officially.
We received our first official death threat the other day. Which again,
not our first official, actually.
That's true. We've had others. That's true.
But it was very chilling.
It was chilling, and it shows you the extent to which, when you start framing things in terms of this moral crusade, this is what you get. What are some of the other risks? And we're going to define stalking in a second, but let's talk about some of the other risks involved here and why this is not just mean girl behavior. Number one, the obsessive nature of the posts. Everyone we talk about this all the time. The number of criminals engaged in murder or very violent acts, almost all of them have some type of obsessive qualities. They ruminate about the victim. They can't stop thinking about the victim. They obsess over the victim, right? That creates an attachment to the victim. Here you have that type of obsession. Another risk here.
Months and months and months of posts, despite not communicating.
Well, despite you saying you feel threatened.
Yeah, starting it with I feel threatened, then the social media, the Instagram to Instagram and TikTok, and there's a YouTube. I didn't know actually until after this, and months and months and months and months of it without any response from me. Escalating. Obsessive.
There's also this inordinate rage and hatred towards you. And that's a risk, because when people develop this intense rage towards another human being, and I think, by the way, with the TikToker, I think a lot of that is repressed. But you see it, the way you see that rage is by ignoring a stalking injunction, right? The way you see that rage come out is by being oppositional. It's after our first hearing, it's going outside on the courtroom steps and doing a mic drop. That's taunting you. The stalker did that. On the day of our hearing in September, she went outside, she filmed herself doing a mic drop. That's harassment.
What was supposed to, it was supposed to be our evidentiary hearing, and the judge changed it to a later date, and
the judge continued it
and lessened the stalking injunction, and she went out and did a mic drop. Against
Utah code, by the way. Utah code specifies quite clearly that you can't modify a stalking injunction without hearing evidence from the petitioner.
And that's what happened.
From Lauren. And the injunction was modified without hearing a shred of evidence from us. Also, just so people know this, our lawyer tried to get the stalking injunction enforced.
My lawyer, who's not my brother, P.S. Go ahead.
Our lawyer, Daston, not her brother, our lawyer who...
One of four.
Yeah, right. We have other lawyers too. None of
them are my brother.
Yeah, so whatever, let the rumor mill. Our lawyer tried to argue correctly that because there were multiple violations of a stalking injunction, which is a felony, that the stalking injunction should get automatically enforced. Guess what?
And that is Utah code. That is if you violate it twice.
Our lawyer made the point that hearing never should have even occurred. It shouldn't have even been an issue. It's black and white. Someone violated a stalking injunction. It gets enforced. It should have been enforced. End of story. Let's move on. You and I have our privacy intact. That's all we wanted. We wanted this to be private. We wanted to move on with our lives without someone harassing us all the time, bullying us, stalking us.
Calling. We'll get into that later. Calling people, contacting people.
That's all we wanted. This argument that somehow we wanted views from Law and Crime or that we set this up, that's so ridiculous. Lauren, I'm not going to read it again. Lauren read a motion that our lawyer wrote to protect our privacy. Almost no civil stalking cases reveal or disclose the information.
Well, and the reason many people have asked that fairly, and you know what? Let's not even get into it. I don't want to talk about it. Yeah. Let the rumor mill continue.
Yeah,
you
that's
guys
fine.
Decide what you think about what I did. That's your right to discuss. Go ahead.
So you have this obsessive behavior that increases risk. You have this inordinate amount of anger and rage towards you, which shows up in those TikToks and those social media. And another thing that people have pointed out that I totally agree with is several people that have looked at the TikTok have written and said, one person wrote, those are the most menacing TikToks I've ever seen. Somebody else wrote, it seems like she's taking pleasure in those, right? That suggests that if that's true, that suggests that there's a sadistic quality, that this is someone taking pleasure in harming you, taking pleasure in hurting you, taking pleasure in trying to ruin your character and your reputation and your livelihood and your life, right? That's a risk factor. Anyone who has sadistic qualities is going to be a higher risk. Another risk factor here is this very oppositional, let's call it antisocial quality, which is violating a stalking injunction in the first several hours after it's issued, right? That's basically saying, I don't care. If you see the picture of her in the bar with you, the message she's sending is, not only do I not care about the stalking injunction, but I'm going to intimidate you. That is a pure message of power and control and dominance and intimidation. She's saying, I'm here. I don't care about this injunction. I am going to continue to intimidate and control you no matter what. Try and stop me. That's concerning. The mic drop moment I just mentioned.
Recording the police officer
calling
after somebody that was called by police implicated her. And so he decided to call her too. And that she called him back to record it.
Right. Recording the police officer, posting it online, and essentially not taking the police officer seriously. That's extremely oppositional. That's very antisocial. That's a very antisocial feature.
Posting that I feel threatened in a message to her, and then posting that online.
And all of this, by the way, so we're talking about risk factors.
Yeah, let's just talk.
We're talking risk factors, right? All of these are risk factors, but they all lead to one thing, and that is dehumanization. What they're doing here is they're portraying you as evil, as the devil, even though Pinata Samurai doesn't mind if you're the devil, by the way. Thank you, Pinata Samurai, for acknowledging that apparently even the devil does really good work.
The devil does do good work, but I will do my best to not be like the devil.
All of this leads to dehumanization, and you and I know every crime we've ever covered it involves some level of dehumanization.
Absolutely, that is crime, dehumanization.
And all of this is about dehumanizing you. Even the people that are mocking you, the memes, it's all dehumanizing, right? But they don't care, right? So, which is fine.
Which is fine. I've been giving people some good content. A 9-hour live would do that.
So I think we've come to the end of this segment.
Okay.
I've covered why I think this is a risk. I've covered why it shouldn't be dismissed and taken seriously. It's virtuous violence. It's a moral crusade, right? I've covered some of the risk factors, but let's back up a little bit and talk about both the definition of stalking and the psychology of stalking, because I think those are going to help us go a little deeper here.
Okay.
But before I do, I just want to make the final point that the reason why human beings like to engage in moral crusades is because it really simplifies the world.
It does. And
it also fosters conformity. So for those of you out there who know a little bit about philosophy, if any of you read Nietzsche on Good and Evil, you understand the importance of Nietzsche's idea that all morality is essentially an attempt to foster and maintain social norms and social moral systems, because the prevailing ruling classes do not want challenges or change. And by enforcing an existing system of morality, you're also making the world fit into a very narrow box, right? And so that's one of the problems of a moral crusade, is that if you don't fit within that box, then you're going to be vilified, right? And so you became vilified. As we talked about on our Patreon, in one of the declarations, the TikToker made it very clear that conformity was a big part of this issue.
Yeah. That was actually in their declaration, and sort of the little joke that I made on our Patreon exclusive episode, which is no longer Patreon exclusive. Thanks to those who picked it apart and shared it. But in their declaration, their angst against me, or one of the things that upset me, was that I talked about how I don't like to conform. And then I jokingly said, thanks for being a Patreon supporter, because that particular episode was behind a paywall, which meant that someone was paying and sending that on to them. But it was ironic, because you have always talked about the fact that one reason this type of thing happens is because they're upset that I'm not conforming.
I talked about the classic example of the Salem witch trials from 1692, where obviously witches are seen as an abomination. They're seen as demonic, right? They're seen as separate from the community, not conforming to the community's morals, right? So in many ways, the Salem witch trials were they showed similarities to a moral crusade. And we'll talk about that a little later. We won't get into that too much, but so I want to make that point before we move on, because I want people to understand the purpose of a moral crusade and what it does, how it fosters conformity or attempts to, and how it really oversimplifies the world, so that people that they don't have to grasp with they don't have to grapple with the complexity of someone who's maybe a little more complex, somebody who can say some off-color things in private messages, someone who has a sarcastic sense of humor. You do. I do. Obviously, it got you in a little bit of trouble on Patreon, but you didn't do anything wrong. Like, part of our brand is to bring in levity. You can't clip a part of that segment and say, oh my God, she's not serious about stalking.
Duping delight, or duper's delight.
So stupid.
If you don't laugh, you cry sometimes. So yeah, thank you.
Everybody that deals with true crime and law enforcement, investigators, they know how difficult it is. They know the importance of humor. Part of our brand is to be humorous. So let's talk about the definition of stalking.
Part of my survival depends on being humorous. Yeah. It's how I cope.
Right. But hey, let's vilify you for that. Let's continue the moral crusade train and just keep piling on because you showed a little bit of humor. Let me start with, so let's start defining stalking. So one of my favorite definitions actually comes out of the UK. So in the UK, there's some local police agencies and social workers and people that kind of deal with stalking that often refer to what they call the big four. And when I say the big four, I mean four as in capital F, capital O, capital U, capital R. And so, and I know this is the UK and not here, but the big four stands for F.
Yeah, what was that one?
Fixated.
Fixated.
F means fixated. Fixated, is this it? So let's go through this. Is there fixation here? So yes, there is. There are social media accounts that specifically target you. That's part of the definition of stalking, is there has to be some type of individual target. Guess what? Every one of these social media accounts is fixated on you. Fixation, yes. O. The O stands for obsessed. Is there obsession here? There's 50 plus or more, way more if you count all the social media accounts.
100.
There's
over 100
posts. There's over 100 posts that showed no signs of stopping or abating, all about you. Is that obsessive? Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And Lindsay did admit on the stand during that hearing that they never heard from me.
She admitted it was about you.
She admitted it was about me.
You were the target.
Mm-hmm.
So we have fixated, obsessed. The U stands for unwanted. You, in an email and in a text, you said, I feel threatened. Please leave me alone.
In both the text and in email.
Email. Did that stop it?
No.
Nope. Actually, it escalated from there. Everything that was being sent to you, you said, please don't do this. And the person continued. Not only continued, but escalated. The R stands for repeated. I think that's obviously a no-brainer. Was this behavior repeated? Obviously, over and over and over. So the definition of stalking, the most simplistic criteria for stalking are fixated, obsessed, unwanted, repeated. Yep, check, 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 check. Here's how on one of the websites that talks about the big four defines stalking. Stalking, and this is stalking, this is physical or cyber, this is both, right? Quote, this is from a website in the UK. Stalking is a pattern of unwanted, repeated behavior that can leave you feeling scared or distressed. You don't have to be threatened with violence to be a victim of stalking. Any kind of persistent, unwanted contact that causes distress is stalking. Do you fit that definition? Yes. Let's talk about, again, this is from the same UK website. I'm also pointing out that this is not just this, the definition of stalking and cyber stalking we're talking about. This is all over the world. This doesn't just apply here. This is in Australia. This is in the UK, right? To identify stalking, they talk about this, what they call the SLII, double I strategy. To identify stalking, professionals often use the SLII strategy. What's the first S? Surveillance. Stalkers often engage in surveillance, closely watching and tracking their victims' movements, routines, and social interactions. This includes monitoring their social media. The goal is to gather personal information and maintain a sense of control over the victim.
And let's talk about recording when at trials or crime con. Interestingly enough, one of the people who wrote a declaration for the stalker, Janice, admitted to filming us multiple times and then even showed in evidence her filming both my producer Grayson and myself, even at CrimeCon after the stalking injunction was put out, and actually put those videos that she unknowingly took of me into evidence.
But there's other ways that you're being, surveillance applies here.
Correct.
They're following your Patreon. They're following when you did a Mormon Stories. She lets you know that she's watching that.
Yes.
She's following everything you're posting, everything you're doing, every social media post. She's recording you without your consent. She's clearly, and she's doing this to gather personal information to harm you.
She even admits, I'm looking for their LinkedIn because I want to see who they're linked to. Isn't it strange they don't have it? I'm going to call UNLV. I did call UNLV. We know other people that they have contacted. Thank you to those who have reached out.
So surveillance. Number two, life invasion. The tactic involves invading the victim's personal life or space. It can be as subtle as sending frequent, unsolicited messages, including on social media. Are you receiving frequent unsolicited messages? Absolutely. The third one is the I part, intimidation. Stalkers often use intimidation to instill fear. How about showing up at CrimeCon when the stalking injunction said she couldn't, and then showing up in the bar 10 feet from you, taunting the police who had issued this injunction, within hours showing up at the bar, basically saying to you, I don't care, I'm in control, I'm going to intimidate, I don't care about this injunction, I own you, right? It's intimidation. The nature of intimidation is threatening messages, aggressive behavior, or implying harm. Implying harm. So it can be something as simple as implying harm. Is there implicit threats and implicit harm throughout this? Absolutely.
Yes.
How about ruining your kingdom, burning your kingdom to the ground? Is that harm?
Yeah.
It also can include reputational harm. The final one is interference. The stalker is involved in deliberately interfering with the victim's life. Examples include damaging someone's reputation or trying to sabotage their personal or professional relationships. The goal is to isolate the victim and make them feel powerless or dependent.
That happened.
Right, exactly. You meet all those criteria. I'm going to read, let's talk specifically about cyber stalking now. This is from the textbook. This is my favorite textbook on criminal psychology, by the way. Criminal Behavior, A Psychological Prose, 12th edition. It's by Kurt Bartol and Ann Bartol, page 521. Their definition of cyber stalking is using the internet or other forms of electronic communication to threaten or engage in unwanted advances towards another. Pretty simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were you threatened? Yes. Was it unwanted advances? Absolutely. Let's talk about cyberbullying. This is how they define cyberbullying. Quote, cyberbullying is defined as sending or posting harmful or cruel text or images using the internet or other digital communication devices. Was saying that you engaged in non-consensual, that you desired to engage in non-consensual relations with your brother to obtain his sperm? Was that a cruel message?
Yeah.
That's cyberbullying. I'm just gonna say quickly what this is also. Ultimately, this is what Bartol and Bartol say about cyber stalking. Quote, ultimately, much cyber stalking is designed to control the victim, usually through threats and harassment. So a large part of this is about control. Here's another definition of cyberbullying. This is from a research article. Quote, building upon this, the definition of traditional bullying, the authors have defined cyberbullying as, quote, an aggressive, intentional act carried out by a group or individual using electronic forms of contact repeatedly and over time against a victim who cannot easily defend him or herself. Some might argue that you could defend yourself, except you can't, really. You couldn't. Right? The reason you couldn't defend yourself is because our brand is not to engage in these types of petty arguments or conflicts with other creators. Like, we're not going to do what he said, she said, or tit for tat. That's not our brand. We couldn't defend ourselves without looking like absolute fools. We couldn't defend ourselves because people have the perception that because we're a bigger channel, that somehow we would be bullying her. We didn't want to defend ourselves because we didn't want to go public with this. We didn't want to defend ourselves because we thought we could ignore it long enough that it would go away. But after months and months and months of continuing multiple posts and escalating, we realized,
to the point where law and crime was getting involved.
Yeah. We realized this got to the point where the risks were increasing, and we weren't willing to deal with this forever. And that is why in the end, we decided to get a stalking injunction.
Well, what I meant about law and crime is even after that, it still got bigger. It's, how did they find out about it? And law and crime got involved. And then I decided to draw my, 9-hour life.
Let's talk about the definition, the legal definition of stalking in Nevada. So I think, is it fair to say that, I guess our haters are going to disagree, but I think sure, any reasonable person would, the criteria I just read would agree, I would hope, or think that they would see that as stalking, or at least cyber stalking. This is cyber stalking in Nevada. You put up, by the way, people can find the definition of cyber stalking and stalking in Utah. You put it up. I don't want to reread that because we already have it.
Okay.
Maybe we can put it up for people to see.
Sure.
But let's talk about Nevada. I don't believe that a reasonable court would think that stalking is nothing more than a cat fight or two mean girls going at it. In Nevada, cyber stalking is considered a Category C felony, carrying a prison sentence of 1 to 5 years and a fine of up to $10,000. The following requirements must be met in Nevada for cyber stalking. The accused person must intentionally cause harm to the victim, even if it's just trying to scare them or make them afraid. So intentional harm, that's a big part of it. Obviously, there's a targeted social media account. Multiple targeted social media accounts, only about you. Did that induce a certain amount of fear in you?
Yes.
Could you explain?
Well, multiple. The song lyrics that she was posting were very frightening, crying about what I lose. What am I going to lose? Burning my fucking kingdom to the ground. Her accomplices constantly egging her on and inciting this, saying, yes, burn that kingdom to the ground, calling workplaces, other people coming forward and saying, I'm getting strange calls from this person saying you're bad, not to work with you, admitting to trying to find our LinkedIns months later, being suspicious, posting and sharing that they're following everything I say, putting eye emojis on podcasts that I'm doing, saying I'm watching you, doing things besides saying, please stop, I'm feeling threatened, posting that I'm feeling threatened, continually, breaking a stalking injunction. And by the way, to all of those that egged her on, there was peer pressure in this. One of those podcasters just claimed yesterday that they would have advised her against ever doing this, yet on her Instagram months ago put, you go, girl. So maybe all of you should be considering how you played a part in this too.
Keep in mind that several of the definitions I just read about cyber stalking include groups. Let's continue. Criteria 2, Nevada, for a Category C felony for cyber stalking in Nevada. Category 2, the accused person must have used electronic devices such as a computer or phone to transmit information that puts the victim at risk of violence or harm. Yep. Stalking must happen online or through some other electronic means. Criteria 3. Criteria 4, the victim must feel fearful. because of the accused person's actions. We just covered that. The final criteria in Nevada is what's called the reasonable person standard. The conduct must be such that a reasonable person in the same situation would also be afraid. That, of course, that would not be up to us to determine. That would be up to the triers of fact, which would be a judge or a jury. Let's talk about this is from probably the best known textbook on stalking, the most well-read and respected textbook on stalking. It's called Stalkers and Their Victims. It's by Mullen, Pathé, and Purcell. It's the second edition from 2009. It's published by Cambridge University Press. Stalkers and Their Victims. Page 153. The following behaviors characterize cyber stalking. Number one, sending repeated unwanted messages.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, via a public platform.
Right. So
and through email, through text,
social media.
I'm feeling threatened, and then through a public social media platform.
Through social media. Another criteria, publishing private information of a potentially damaging or embarrassing nature. Again, I mentioned that publishing private information is illegal, but that too is cyber stalking. So anybody in this group who has published private information about you publicly that's potentially damaging to your reputation is part of the smear campaign. And they're engaging in cyber stalking. The next criteria, spreading false information. How many rumors, how much gossip has been spread about you that you damage, you hurt creators, that you don't care about victims, right? Like no matter what you say or do, that rumor persists endlessly. And then in the smear campaign, you get, wait for the receipts, wait for the receipts. That too is a form of harassment. That too is a threat. When you wake up every day to a social media campaign of multiple people constantly saying they're going to take you down.
And writing, again, my professional contact saying, oh, just wait for the receipts. Just wait, they're coming.
So spreading false information, that's another criteria. Here's another criteria. Gathering information about a victim online. That's called doxing. Did we get doxed? Oh, we got doxed. We got so doxed.
They were mad they had to work a little bit harder because we didn't have a LinkedIn, which is super sauce. It's like saying you don't have a face if you don't have a Facebook. You know, is anything we're saying true?
So doxing, by the way, that's classic harassment. In fact, doxing is defined as harassment. Were we doxed? Yes, I was doxed. You were doxed. You know, I guess there was some good news that came out of it because she said, the TikToker said that she believed there was so little information on us because we curated our accounts. We have
curated our Google search results.
We've curated nothing.
Haven't curated a dang thing.
I don't even know how I would curate. I don't know how to curate.
I mean, maybe we should get somebody to do that. We could.
And here is the last cyber stalking behavior that defines cyber stalking. Ready for this one?
Mm-hmm.
Encouraging others to harass the victim.
There's a lot of that, and a lot of that publicly.
Exactly. Do we fit these criteria? Do we fit these definitions? All right. So I'm going to stay with the textbook, Stalkers and Their Victims, second edition. I'm going to use some of their definitions. Page 2, defining stalking. And again, this isn't cyber stalking. I'm defining stalking here, broadly speaking. Or they don't even call it stalking. They call it obsessional following. This is how they define obsessional following. Ready? Quote, an abnormal or long-term pattern of threat or harassment directed towards a specific individual. Yep. Here's how the authors define it. Stalking is, quote, a constellation of behaviors in which one individual inflicts on another repeated, unwanted intrusions and communications. Yep. So I've read a lot of definitions of stalking. I've read definitions of cyber stalking. Do they fit?
Yes.
Yet, of course, there's plenty of people apparently out there who argue that this wasn't stalking, this was catfighting, this was Real Housewives stuff, whatever, there was no harm involved. I would urge them to go look at the legal and academic definitions, as I just defined, of stalking. Because stalking, one of the interesting things out there in terms of listening to some of this debate about what stalking is that almost all the people who would disagree with the academic criteria that I'm reading and the legal criteria, they see stalking as like a 1930s phenomenon where you follow someone around in your old Ford, I don't know, 1930s cars, your old Ford Jalopy with a gun, right? They think stalking is physically following someone around with a gun, right? Guess what? It's not. We live in 2025. Stalking is fixated obsessional behavior that's unwanted and repeated that causes distress in the victim. That's precisely what's going on with you. So this idea that there's a team Lauren and a team, I mean, people can believe whatever they want, but like this idea of teams is absurd. If you look at the criteria for stalking, how it's defined legally and academically, there's two teams. There's team Lauren, who fits all the criteria of stalking and cyber stalking, every one of them. And then there's the stalking team, who doesn't fit who meets all the criteria of someone who's stalking. I don't know. I mean, have we litigated that in court yet? Nope. But I feel very confident that if and when we do, if we re-up this case and litigate it in another state that's not Provo, Utah, that we're going to show quite clearly that you meet the criteria for stalking and that you need protection.
And to the media who thinks that filming civil stalking injunctions is okay. By the way, I hope that you can reconsider that position and wonder if this is maybe why people that are being abused can't escape their abusers, or that it might be used as an abuser's way of coercive control if they're encouraging media to cover a civil stalking injunction.
Well, and on that point, by the way, we fought vigorously for privacy.
We did.
Vigorously.
The same county, by the way, where Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I might add, by someone who was incited by online rhetoric and violence. The same county where someone lost their lives because of online rhetoric.
You said lives. Did Charlie Kirk have multiple lives?
Lost their life.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
On that note, when you talk about privacy, let's remind everybody that you guys could have gone public 4 months ago.
Yeah.
We could have sent masses to this woman's account 4 months ago. And why didn't we? Because we said, it's okay, we'll handle it. Let's just be private about it. We don't want anybody to know. Nobody knew about it for months. because we continued to just try and be quiet until we felt like we had no other option.
So Grayson is over here saying, let's remind people that we could have come forward in public 4 months ago and taken this into our hands and send everybody over to her account and taken care of this 4 months ago. But we didn't, because we wanted this to remain private. And we didn't want people going over to her account to harass her or attack her. We could have come forward 4 months ago, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'm also saying somebody reached out to me who knows this person, and they just wanted to let me know that they had been contacted. And I told them I find myself having a lot of empathy for her right now, regardless of what she's done, because I see the hate that she's getting, and I would never want somebody to feel that way. And I would never want somebody to consider maybe doing something to themselves, or maybe, like, I actually don't believe, I don't think that the way you get somebody to have remorse and to change their behavior is by screaming at them.
Yeah.
Right.
I actually feel like that incites anger and that makes them more vengeful. And so I find myself having a lot of
hurt people.
It can hurt people. It can incite, look at the death threat we got online with somebody loading a gun and quite literally shooting it, saying, if you come to my state, guess what I'm going to do? But so I don't believe in that. And I was telling this person who reached out, who had a relationship with this person,
the TikToker,
and just wanted to give me some information. I said, thank you for the information. And I literally sent back a message and said, I find myself having a lot of empathy. And although I'm really struggling right now, it's no secret I am. I've been public about it. Haven't been public about the specifics. I find myself having a lot of empathy because I wonder if she's maybe in a similar boat that I've been in for the last while. And I never want somebody to feel that way. And again, I don't think that going to her account and screaming at her and telling her she's wrong, if you want someone to change, that's not the way to get them to change. That actually makes them worse. The best way you can appeal to somebody's empathy and the appeal to their conscience, really, if they have one, is by having one yourself and trying to do it reasonably. Now, is this person reasonable? I wouldn't necessarily say so, but I would say that, like, again, just going crazy on her on social media is not going to do anything.
Well, yeah, and to the people that egged her on. That's my point too. The peer pressure to every one of those commenters egging her on and continuing to tell her to do this. You also, hold some responsibility. That's mobbing. It's group bullying. And you didn't help her either.
So I've gone through the criteria for stalking, both legal and academic definitions. To me, it seems pretty clear cut that you meet those criteria. Let's move on to different types of stalkers. So I'm going to refer to the same textbook, Stalkers and Their Victims, 2nd edition, published in 2009. There are two different typologies. There's actually multiple typologies. There's like 4 typologies of stalkers that they identify, 4 or 5. But I only want to focus on the ones that apply here. So they actually lump them together because there's a lot of overlap, but they refer to this type of stalking as the rejected stalker and the resentful stalker. So what is the rejected stalker? The rejected stalker is the rejected stalker occurs as a consequence of the breakdown of a close relationship. So in other words, with you, you had a friendship with the person, or a perceived friendship. For you, it was more of a parasocial relationship rather than a close relationship, but that's not how she perceived it. You have the breakdown of a relationship. You have the desire to exact revenge for the rejection. And then, you ready for this? The stalking substitutes for the lost intimacy of the friendship by creating the semblance of closeness that's now gone. I'm just going to read a little bit from the text about rejected stalkers because they're going to explain it better than me. Page 69 in the Rejected Stalker in the Mullen textbook. Quote, the rejected can be among the most persistent and intrusive of stalkers. Once established, their pattern of harassment is very difficult to alter. It's not always immediately obvious why these men and women continue so tenaciously to pursue their erstwhile victim. Further down the page, quote, for those stalkers who cannot abandon the hope of restoring the relationship, the harassment at least provides some semblance of connectedness to the lost friend. For the rejected stalker who is predominantly angry and vengeful, the stalking seems aimed, in part, at continuing a relationship in which, for all their raging, they remain enmeshed. The stalking, in a sense, is a continuation of a relationship, the loss of which is too threatening, or which they remain bound by unresolved emotions and desires, made all the more compelling by their ambivalent nature. So in other words, for the rejected stalker, a part of the stalking is to maintain the sense of connection and closeness with the victim, you. Let's talk about some of the psychopathology behind rejected stalkers. According to the research, quote, this type of stalker had high rates of personality problems with antisocial and narcissistic traits being particularly prominent. There was also a small but significant cluster with marked dependency traits. So those are rejected stalkers. Let's move on to what they call the resentful stalker. So the rejected stalker part of this is the rejection of your friendship.
Okay.
Let's talk about the resentful stalker.
Okay.
The resentful stalker emerges where the stalker feels that they have been exposed to an injustice or humiliation. That was you calling her annoying in a private text.
Yeah.
So she is both a rejected and a resentful stalker. The victim of the resentful stalker is someone who has attracted the stalker's enmity by their own actions or by seen as representative of an oppressing group. The desire is for revenge, sometimes of a surreptitious nature. The sustaining motivation of the resentful stalker is satisfying the sense of power and control that comes from harassing the victim. The resentful stalker almost invariably feels justified in their actions, that's the moral part, and presents themselves as a victim, fighting back against a more powerful oppressor. That, by the way, is a narrative that many people have picked up on. Because you're the big creator,
Yeah.
she must be the victim.
Right.
Right? That's a common theme that seems to be out there, that somehow you're harassing her because she's the poor victim, right? That's what's resentful.
She's not a creator. She's just a person that is a tourist at trials, and I'm the big podcaster.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into the resentful stalker. Here are some clinical features of the resentful stalker. Again, I'm reading from the textbook Stalkers and Their Victims, second edition. This is page 76. Quote, a context of conflict in which one party experiences themselves as a victim of injustice can give rise to stalking. This type of stalking is initially motivated by the desire for retribution. The stalking is designed to frighten and distress the victim. The stalking becomes persistent because of the satisfactions the stalker obtains from the sense of power and control over someone who is, in most cases, has been previously regarded as being in a stronger and more privileged position. In keeping with the stalker's perception of their victim as being more powerful, The more extended episodes of resentful stalking will often be pursued anonymously, at least initially. When this type of stalker is interviewed, they almost invariably present themselves not as an avenger, but as a victim who, in the process of defending themselves, is striking back at the oppressor. So, in other words, it's a moral crusade.
And she does this. She'll say, I'm just here. This isn't gossip. I'm just
trying to deal with the big bad wolf that's Lauren.
I'm just trying to present patterns she's had for so long.
Let's talk about psychopathology of the resentful stalker. Page 77, quote, the pattern which emerged from personality testing suggested self-centered, immature individuals who are hostile, demanding, and argumentative. They overestimate themselves and they derogate others. That means they put others down. Defensiveness and denial is rampant in this group. They tend to have poor frustration tolerance with high suppressed anger. Check, 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 check.
Yeah.
Oh, let me say on that issue, like, I don't know, do I know for sure that she fits this category? No, I don't. Like, just looking at her behaviors, it seems like she fits some of this, but I'm not diagnosing here, right? I'm just reading from a textbook.
Research.
I'm citing the research, right? I'm not saying necessarily that she fits this. I think people can make that decision on their own. Let's go on. Page 77, next paragraph, quote, resentful stalkers as a group showed a marked tendency to consciously attempt to present themselves in a socially desirable light, perhaps fitting with our view that these people attempt to project themselves as good victims battling the forces of evil. Let me repeat that because it fits everything we talked about earlier. Resentful stalkers fit they fit with the view that they attempt to project themselves as good victims battling the forces of evil. That's exactly how this is framed. That's exactly how most smear campaigns are framed. The results of MMPI studies in 24 resentful stalkers supported the notion that these people regard themselves as misunderstood, mistreated, with low frustration tolerance, and difficulty with authority figures. Difficulty with authority figures. So taunting police, doing mic drops outside of courthouses, violating stalking injunctions within hours after they're served by police, telling the stalker, you cannot go within 500 feet of your victim, no matter what. Those are some of the definitions. So I've talked about the definitions of stalking. I've talked about the types of stalking. Now let's talk about victim impact. Actually, before I get to victim impact, let me talk a little bit about, let's talk more about actually qualities of cyberbullies. So specifically about cyberbullies. There isn't a lot of research on adult cyberbullies, by the way, but there's enough. There's some interesting research. This is from a research article entitled Systematic Review of Empirical Studies on Cyberbullying in Adults, What We Know and What We Should Investigate. This is by Gennaro et al. In the journal Aggression and Violent Behavior. This is 2018, so reasonably recent, volume 28. This is on page 118. Here are some of the qualities of cyberbullies. Quote, in a cyberbullying situation, not only the victims are affected, several studies found that cyberbullies exhibit more psychological symptoms, including depression. So that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
They could be more depressed than.
Yeah.
So they experience depression. They have more unemotional, impulsive, and psychopathic traits. They're high sensation seekers, and they sometimes engage in violent and drug crimes. The most interesting part of this to me is the depression, that they're unemotional, they're impulsive, and lo and behold, cyberbullies tend to have psychopathic traits, which means that they defy or oppose authority figures. Quote, they also scored high on internet use, showed a lack of social skills, problematic alcohol use, and, not surprisingly, low empathy towards their cyberbullying victims. So cyberbullies are unemotional, they lack empathy, they're impulsive, they have psychopathic traits, they may have some depression. Let's talk about impact. How does cyberbullying impact its victims? This is an extraordinary this is an extraordinary study.
Just have to say, for all those people saying bring the receipts, Dr. John's bringing the research receipts.
I'm bringing the research receipts, right? You brought the actual receipts. I'm bringing the research receipts. This is from a well-known article in the American Psychologist. The American Psychologist, by the way, is one of the premier journals for psychologists. It's from 2017, volume 72. It's Underwood and Ehrenreich. It's called The Power and Pain of Adolescence's Digital Communication, Cyber Victimizations, and the Perils of Lurking. Okay. Admittedly, I'm going to frame this by saying, admittedly, this is pertaining to adolescence, okay? But I'm sure this has application to adults.
Sure it does.
Relying on surveys about the frequency of cyber stalking may keep us from understanding that although cyber aggression may be an extremely low base rate event, so even among adolescents, cyber stalking and cyber aggression is fairly low. That's good news, right?
Okay.
Let me, since I stopped in the middle of that, I'll go again. Although cyber aggression may be an extremely low base event, it hurts terribly even if it only happens once. This is according to their survey. The impact of even a single episode is potentially extremely serious because the behavior is immediately viewed by hundreds of friends and followers and is preserved forever in digital form. I can't tell you how much that impacted you, and they're proving it.
Well, one reason we chose to not say this person's name and to blur her and the TikToks, which we didn't need to do, was because of that understanding. We're not going to do that.
Correct. But this research...
She appeared publicly. She wanted everyone to find her. She was working on algorithms. She admits it on the TikTok. Come join me. Send the word. Spread the word. Here we are. And we still didn't do that because we understand what that means. We didn't want to do that.
We went through it. We went through it. But I mean, like, this is extraordinary because when people mock you about whether this is cyberbullying, when people say team Lauren's a joke, I don't know what they're saying. I don't care. But the point, like, this data, this research that shows, I'm going to read it again because it's so, the impact of even a single episode is potentially extremely serious because the behavior is immediately viewed by hundreds of friends and followers and is preserved forever in digital form. Not to mention which, the internet is open 24/7.
Yeah.
So any threats or any posts on social media can happen at any time of the day or night. There were times when you would wake up at 3 a.m. and go, is there a post? Is there a post? What does she say now? Is she threatening me now? But this explains why even a single episode of cyberbullying can be traumatic.
Yeah.
Because the fear is that it's going to be viewed by thousands, hundreds or thousands of people, and it's never going to be erased. It's going to exist forever. This is exceptionally important. Let's talk about more victim impact. I'm going to read from an article called A Developmental Approach to Cyberbullying, Prevalence and Protective Factors. It's by Kowalski et al. It's in Aggression and Violent Behavior, 2019, volume 45. This is on page 22. Outcomes of cyberbullying. Quote, researchers have consistently found that cyberbullying is associated with a variety of negative consequences for both victims and perpetrators. Among the negative consequences experienced by victims are higher levels of anxiety, depression, loneliness, greater suicidal ideation, lower levels of self-esteem, and poor academic performance.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah. Yep, I've noticed all of that. Every one of those applies to you. I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to return to the textbook, Criminal Behavior. I'm going to give their summary of psychological effects of stalking, specifically cyber stalking. Page 523 of Criminal Behavior by Bardell and Bardell, quote, not only does the cyber attack cause psychological damage to the self-esteem and self-image of the victim, but the message may be immediately viewed and forwarded by friends and other peers repeatedly over time. That's the point about how one incident can be so damaging. I think it's important to understand that if you bully someone at school, if you taunt them at school, it may be captured by other people on cell phones, but for the most part, it's a one-time thing and it goes away. And I'm not minimizing that. That's horrible. But cyber stalking goes on over and over and over again.
You can't escape it.
Can't escape it. Research studies often report that the overall effects of cyberbullying on the victim include anxiety disorders, sleep problems, loneliness, depression, substance abuse, poor academic achievement, low life satisfaction, and extreme cases, suicide attempts. Check, 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 and check. So I've covered the definitions and criteria of stalking. I've covered the types of stalking. I've covered victim impact. I've covered some of the psychological characteristics of the stalker, especially resentful and rejected stalkers. Let's move on to what I think is really critically important in understanding stalking, and that's the psychology of stalking.
We're just getting started, guys. I'm looking at this, and you told me about this part, and this is important.
I told you this is going to take a long time.
Yeah. And you guys were making fun of my 9-hour live. Dr. John is ready. He's like, hold my Coca-Cola. Here we go.
I don't drink Coke. Hold my iced tea.
There we go.
So I put up a diagram from a book called The Psychology of Stalking, Clinical and Forensic Perspectives. It's edited by J. Reed Malloy. This happens to be from his chapter in the book, from the chapter by J. Reed Malloy. J. Reed Malloy is one of my psychologist heroes. He's brilliant. He's done a tremendous amount of research on psychopaths, early research on psychopaths. He's done a lot of research on the psychology of stalking. He's a brilliant guy. If you look at the schematic I put up, I'm going to talk about his theory borne out by research and evidence of stalking. So for Malloy, stalking begins with what he calls a narcissistic linking fantasy.
This is so interesting to me. Okay. Guys, she was explaining this to me, and I was like, oh, okay.
You're like, oh crap.
Okay, here we go. A narcissistic linking fantasy.
You'll see on the schematic that under the narcissist, it says narcissistic linking fantasy. And some of the typical narcissistic linking fantasies are, they're listed by Malloy: special, loved, idealized, admired by, superior to, destined to be with the object. So what does he mean by a narcissistic linking fantasy? What he means essentially is that someone with narcissistic features, that's very self-absorbed, creates a fantasy that links them to the stalked object. The stalked object in most cases is a person. The narcissistic linking fantasy, so there's a link between the personality, often with narcissistic features. That's how people become so obsessed, because they're narcissistic, right? They're obsessed and they're narcissistic. They create a link to this fantasy of the object. Those fantasies revolve around feelings. I'll read it.
Yeah.
Page 18 from The Psychology of Stalking by J. Reed Malloy. Quote, the general dynamic begins with the individual forming in her mind a narcissistic linking fantasy to a particular object. Such fantasies are characterized by conscious thoughts of being loved by or loving, admired by or admiring, in parentheses, idealizing, being exactly like, in parentheses, mirroring or complementing, in parentheses, twinship, or sharing a destiny with a particular object or person, in parentheses, merger. So I'm going to read this again without the parentheses. Such fantasies, narcissistic linking fantasies to a particular object, such fantasies are characterized by conscious thoughts of being loved by or loving, admired by or admiring, being exactly like or complementing, or sharing a destiny with a particular object or person. So you begin with a narcissistic linking fantasy. I'm going to start with that, okay? Because that's the basis of stalking.
Yeah.
But let's I'm going to switch lanes a little bit here because I'm going to come back to this, but I'm going to switch lanes. So I'm going to swerve a little bit here, and I'm going to talk about an Eminem song from 2000 called Stan. A stan is basically a combination of a fan and a stalker, and the song is specifically about a fan who becomes a stalker because presumably Eminem or a celebrity won't respond to this person's emails. The reason I bring this up is because two of the detectives in Colorado that were responsible for executing the stalking order, they talked to you and Grayson afterwards, and they both referred to the TikToker as a fangirl. In fact, I wrote it down because Grayson told me what they said. One of the detectives said, I think this is a fangirl who rode yours. I think this is a fangirl who rode your coattails for a bit and then fell off, and now she's very angry about it. So this is important because although I don't really see you or us as celebrities, like,
no,
in our little niche, in our little true crime niche, people know us, right? So it doesn't really matter whether we're not Brad Pitt, we're not Angelina Jolie, right? Like, obviously we're not famous, but in our little niche, people know us. And that, by the way, is sufficient. That's sufficient to have someone fangirl you. Or me, I guess, to some degree. By the way, you get recognized all the time in public. Last week was the first time somebody recognized. I was at a Trader Joe's.
They were like, is your wife the one that did that crazy 9-hour live?
No, that was before. I was wearing a mask. In Trader Joe's because I thought nobody would recognize me. And I don't want to get sick because Trader Joe's is kind of a tight space. But somebody came up to me and they're like, are you Dr. John with Hidden True Crime? And I was like, maybe.
Who's asking?
I don't know.
I'm on a tight schedule. Gotta go.
Anyway,
You were very flattered.
I was flattered. She was very kind. I just thanked her for watching us. I told her I was very appreciative that she recognized me and watched us. But
it doesn't happen a lot.
It doesn't happen a lot. It happened once with me. My point is, though, that although you're not a celebrity at a major level, you're a celebrity enough to the TikToker that detectives are applying this label fangirl. So that brings me to, I talked earlier about psychological essentialism as a category, psychological essentialism. Now I'm going to talk about something called life force essentialism. Life force essentialism is different than category essentialism in the sense that I can't find my notes. Oh, there it is. Life force.
I got his notes down, guys. They're all spread out. I'm like, there you go. Life force essentialism. Boom.
I'm doing a good job of managing them. So
you are. You're doing great.
Life force essentialism is different than category essentialism in the sense that with life force essentialism, people see things and objects as having an underlying essence. And oftentimes that underlying essence might be seen as having special properties. So like an example of that would be, let's say that Ohtani, who plays for the Dodgers, hits the game-winning home run in the World Series that's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
The baseball that he hits, hypothetically, right? I don't, because the World Series hasn't been played. The baseball that he hits, let's say the baseball he hits to win the World Series in 2025 is caught by a fan, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say it's caught by a kid. That baseball now has a lot of value. That's a baseball that if you just bought it off the shelf would be like $5, right? But because Ohtani hit it, it now acquires what's called life force essentialism. It requires this special property, this almost magical property of having been hit by Ohtani to win the World Series, right? It requires this life force quality that people want and they're willing to pay for. So
baseball. It's baseball.
It's a baseball.
It's a baseball.
It's just a baseball, special. Right? But it's now worth millions of dollars because people attribute these magical properties to it or these special properties to it, right? The same thing is true of celebrities. So
when I was a teen, I saved the pen that a singer signed with backstage,
right? Because you thought it had special qualities, and so this is one of the reasons why people want to associate with celebrities. So, for example, I remember years ago, there was some celebrity auction where I think George Clooney was like auctioning off one of his sweaters or something. And so, and somebody paid like $250,000 for that. The sweater by itself was probably worth $100, $150. I don't know. Maybe it's George Clooney.
Yeah, but
$500, right? But because George Clooney wore it, people perceived that it had special properties and they bought it for $250,000. And guess what? The person who bought it said, I will never wash this sweater, because the idea somehow is that even though it's the same damn sweater,
George Clooney might have sweating it now.
Right. Because
Just,
George Clooney's DNA is on this thing. The person's never going to wash it because they feel like they have some connection to George Clooney. Right. So if they wear that sweater, they're like, hey, I'm George Clooney. Right. Or whatever. So, but that's called life force essentialism. The reason I mention that is because when we think about this idea of a narcissistic linking fantasy, this idea of life force essentialism is part of that fantasy. The fantasy is that if you're, as the detective said, if someone is fangirling someone, they're trying to get some of that essence. So I think there's the part of this narcissistic linking fantasy for the TikToker here has to do with this idea of being a, let's call it a pseudo stan or a semi stan, right? It has to do with the fact that all the detectives in Colorado that talked to you about the situation, they saw the TikToker as a fangirl. That's how they defined her, right? And so it's interesting that there's this fantasy here about whatever the special quality you have, it's going to rub off on her. And that's part of this. That's part of this idea of not wanting to lose that connection to you. And having said that, I think if we're going to talk about the psychology of stalking, there's some elements here that there's been some research on stans that we need to talk about. So some of the elements that they found that create stans that engage in this type of celebrity worship or even fangirl people at a lower level like you, they found that an insecure parent-child attachment is typically common in stans. They found that parental absence, so not even abuse, not neglect, not childhood trauma, just parental absence. So one parent, one or the other, or both parents can be absent more than usual. The presumption here is obviously that if a parent is absent or not giving a child enough attention, it could be that you grow up in a really big family and maybe one of the parents isn't as available. The presumption is that the reason you stalk celebrities or you fangirl pseudo celebrities or semi celebrities is because you're trying to make up for that parental absence. You're trying to engage with a parental figure or a special figure that somehow is going to give you something you didn't have when you were a child. There was a study in Hong Kong that looked at adolescents who engaged in celebrity worship. And what they found was a couple of things. That the subjects in the study who did not have any particular preference for celebrities tended to have fairly high confidence and fairly high self-esteem. The kids who went after celebrities and engaged the stans, who engaged in more celebrity worship, they had a weaker sense of self and lower self-confidence. The absorption addiction model says that stans or fangirls or fanboys, whatever, stans pursue parasocial relationships. So in other words, not real significant, not relationships where you know someone. Stans pursue parasocial relationships to make up for shortages in their real lives. And in that pursuit, they end up losing themselves. That's called
stans in general.
That's called the absorption addiction model. And I think we see elements of that here. That I think in some ways that, a lot of people have said online, get a life, grow up, right? That's saying the same thing. That's saying whatever's going on in this TikToker's life, that it's somehow deficient.
When it comes to media law, I think that I would define myself a limited public figure. Anyway, keep going. People can disagree with that, but legally speaking.
But it's the same dynamic. Mm-hmm. The point is, it's the same dynamic that fangirling anyone is this attempt to make up for deficits in someone's life.
Yeah.
There's a woman, her name is Amanda Montell. She wrote a book called The Age of Magical Overthinking. This is going to be a quote from her book, page 24. She's talking about celebrity worship. This doesn't refer to you. This just refers to her thoughts in general.
In general.
Quote Montell, quote, page 24. In both the public and private spheres, worship is dehumanizing. To be deified is not so flattering. The dynamic risks annihilating a person's room for complexity and blunders, and this sets everyone up for suffering.
Wow. It's really fascinating. Worship is dehumanizing. You're looking at the book. Can I just see the book?
Yeah.
I want to hold it up. Keep reading. Keep going.
So let me read that again. So So some of the dehumanization in this smear campaign is the fact that you're portrayed as evil, right? Like that you've been labeled psychological essentialism. They've taken certain texts or whatever and private texts, and they've labeled you evil. And then there's this moral crusade.
Yeah.
But there's other ways you can dehumanize, and one of them is by portraying someone as something they're not giving them the room to, as she says, not giving them the room to be complex and to make blunders. If you don't give someone the room to be complex and to make blunders, you, according to her, I agree, you set everyone up for suffering because you're not defining it as a real relationship.
Yeah.
You're defining it as a cliched, right? Rigid, narrow relationship. And if you do that, so if you're fangirling someone and the relationship turns out to be not what you expected, there's a lot of room in there for disappointment. There's a lot of room in there for anger. There's a lot of room to turn against someone because that relationship is turning out not to be what you wanted. And so now that I'm thinking about this, I'm actually going to read another quote from Amanda's book, Act Like I Know Her.
This is really interesting. You did not talk to me about this.
Act Like I Know Her. I don't know her.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting book.
That's true. I see celebrities dehumanized all the time, real celebrities.
Here's what she says. It's just a sentence. It's simple, but I think it's totally relevant to our discussion. Quote, page 21, quote, nearly every stan worship A-lister has seen their flock's mania pervert overnight from devotion to disdain. Some of the people she talks about, Beyonce.
Who was exceptionally private.
There's so many. Charlie XCX. There's so many, right? Like if you're a stand worship A-lister, loved by your flock, loved by your group, you can literally go overnight from devotion to disdain based upon one mistake, right? And I think you're not an A-list celebrity, right? Like, but the point is, like, part of this campaign is to try to flip that script. Part of this campaign is to try to get your flock to go from devotion to disdain by dehumanizing you, by not giving you any room for complexity, not giving you any room for vulnerability, not giving you any room for blunder, as she puts it.
Yeah.
And fortunately, our viewers are astute and they see through that. But that's part of this.
Yeah. Your gems, not minions.
Yeah. Our gems, not minions. Yeah, I know. Right. Let's go back. No, let's return. So I talked about this idea of stands and what creates a stand, and this really important idea of life force essentialism in terms of, right, you want to buy the celebrity's sweater so that you can feel like you're getting some of that special quality, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't know how someone can afford a sweater for $250,000, but hey,
someone did, and they love it. So
okay, let's go back to our diagram. So it begins with a narcissistic linking fantasy or life force essentialism, and then you go to what he calls acute or chronic rejection. So you have the fantasy, you have rejection. The rejection leads to feelings of shame or humiliation, which is then defended against with rage, which then leads to behavioral pursuit. That's the stalking. It fuels behavioral pursuit. The behavioral pursuit is intended to hurt, to control, to damage, or destroy. Only after the target, you, is hurt, controlled, damaged, or destroyed is the narcissistic linking fantasy restored.
Wow.
And this gets back to the idea that we've been talking about all along, that the goal of a cyber stalker or any stalker, a physical stalker, it doesn't matter. the goal is to ruin and damage the person beyond repair, or to have them end up dead. That's how stuff like this, that's how this stuff ends. And the reason, according to Malloy, is because that's the only way for the stalker to restore the narcissistic linking fantasy.
Wow.
Okay, now we talked about so much.
Yeah.
But we talked about recently the psychology of stalking. We've talked about the research on that. We've talked about Malloy's chart, types of stalkers, stalking criteria, definitions. One of the big issues out there, in addition to all that, one of the big issues out there is one of the arguments for the TikToker, for the stalker, is that it's free speech. Right? This is probably the biggest argument. Well, it's free speech. This is just Mean Girls. Free speech, Mean Girls. Who cares? Mean Girls are Mean Girls. That doesn't mean you should get a stalking injunction. Don't weaponize the legal system. Stupid.
Cat fight.
Cat fight.
That's how John talks when he's not on camera.
Yeah.
It's like, Lauren, what's up? No, just kidding.
One thing that philosophers do, that, you know, since I was majored in philosophy as an undergrad, one of the things I always loved about philosophy, even back when I was an undergrad, which
getting his undergrad at Princeton, might I add, winning the thesis award. I know that you always underplay, and at this moment, now that people are trying to mock your education, I'm going to own it. He's brilliant. Scholarship. Valedictorian. Go ahead.
There's this argument about free speech, and as a matter of fact, in the TikTokers' attorney's objection, that was the heart of it.
Yeah.
This is free speech. Who cares if she says that you want to have non-consensual relations with your brother, right? Who cares if she's threatening to harm your business? Who cares if she's reaching out to everyone in your business contacts and trying to ruin you and damage you? None of that matters because this is free speech. So, you know, one of the things philosophers like to do is we like to think about thought experiments. And I came up with one.
Okay, a thought experiment. Okay. For all of us at home, including me, I'm at home. A thought experiment with Dr. John Matthias.
Thought experiment.
PhD. All right.
And the reason we present thought experiments is because the reason philosophers do thought experiments is because they're trying to figure out kind of the boundaries around an issue, right? And whether by going through a thought experiment, you can ask questions about whether this is free speech, whether it's not, right? I'm presenting a hypothetical, but I think you could see this easily as being real. So
Okay.
in my thought experiment, there's a woman, Sylvia, and Sylvia has a daughter named Becky.
Okay.
And Becky's best friend is someone in school. They're adolescents.
Okay.
They're both 16 years old. Becky's best friend is Victoria.
Okay. Becky and Victoria.
Yeah. And Victoria happens to be the captain of the volleyball team. She's very well liked. She's considered to be one of the more attractive girls in her class,
Okay.
which is, I think, sophomore, junior years in high school. But Becky and Victoria have a falling out. And Becky's very angry at Victoria because Becky wanted Victoria to help her join the in crowd, and Victoria was kind of on the fence. She didn't really know how to do it, but she was happy to help her. But Becky thought it wasn't enough.
Okay.
Becky felt like she was being shunned by Victoria in certain areas, and that Victoria could have helped her more to become more popular.
Okay.
So Becky goes home to her mother, Sylvia, and Becky says, "Mom, I'm really hurt. I just got shunned. I just got rejected by my best friend, Victoria, and I don't know what to do, and I don't want to deal with her anymore, and I'm done with it." And Sylvia says, "You know what? I love true crime. there's this raging debate online now about a stalking situation, and everyone says it's free speech, and I agree it's free speech. And you know what you should do, Becky? You should open a TikTok account, and you should target Victoria. And what you should do with your account is you should try to harm her and ruin her life as much as you can, because that's perfectly acceptable under free speech. And what I recommend you start with is that you start with a post that you want to come back to, by the way. You want to repeatedly come back to this post, but you start with a post about how Victoria engaged in non-consensual contact with several of her younger siblings. And Becky says, oh, that's great. That sounds great. I hate Victoria. I want to start this TikTok. I want to really hurt her. So she posts the first TikTok in a video of Victoria engaging in non-consensual relations with her younger siblings. Goes viral. Victoria is really hurt. People believe it. People start shunning Victoria. People start avoiding her. None of it's true, by the way. But Victoria becomes a bit of a laughingstock. People are talking endlessly behind her back about the supposed non-consensual contact that Victoria had with her younger siblings. Victoria is so upset by this, and she's receiving so much mockery at school that she has to, within a year, she has to leave the volleyball team, and she leaves school to be homeschooled by her mother. Becky continues because Sylvia, her mother, says, you know what? You should post as much as you can. Post every day. Go back to the post about non-consensual contact, about Victoria being an abuser. Go back to that regularly, but post other stuff. But now post her dropping out of school to be homeschooled and how only losers do that. Now post that she wasn't strong enough to stay in school, that she wasn't strong enough to stay on the volleyball team. I want you to just mock her because free speech. They graduate from high school. Victoria does it obviously not in the actual school. She does it from home. And when she graduates, Becky posts that homeschool doesn't really count, that even though she passed all the accreditation exams and did what she needed to do, that Victoria is a loser because she had to be homeschooled and she couldn't stand the fact that she couldn't deal with the truth that she was in fact an abuser. But of course, Becky's posting all kinds of other things, like she says, I'm going to burn your flipping kingdom to the ground. She's saying she's going to expose her, that because she was her best friend, she has all these private text messages and emails that she's going to put out there to harm her. She continues posting every day. Years pass, still posting. Victoria gets married. She sees that Becky sees that Victoria's posted photos of her marriage. So she mocks her marriage. She mocks her husband. She talks about how ugly he is, what a loser he is, how he has no future, what a loser she is. She continues to say that whatever Victoria has in her life, she's going to take it away and she's going to burn her kingdom to the ground. Victoria finally has kids. When her first child is born, Becky posts that she believes Victoria is now going to abuse her child. She posts that her children are losers. She posts that CPS should become involved because, of course, she's an abuser and the child are going to be taken away. So why doesn't CPS jump in now? And she can do all this because, of course, free speech. She can say whatever she damn well pleases, right? Free speech. Victoria has another child a couple years later. Same thing. She has another child. Same thing. Becky keeps posting that her children are going to be sexually abused. She keeps posting that Victoria is an abuser, that CPS should get involved, take her kids. She won't stop with that theme. Victoria is struggling. This is taking a toll on her. It's taking an immense toll on her. So finally, Victoria and her husband decide that they're going to pursue a stalking injunction with the court. The initial injunction is granted, but they go to court, and basically the judge says, this is just a catfight between two now adult females, but this is a catfight between adult females, and of course, free speech, because you know what, Victoria? I don't think Becky should be silenced. I don't think anyone should be silenced. So just basically take it. And even though, Becky's a little bit of a mean girl, maybe she's cyberbullying you a little bit, I think that stalking is just showing up at someone's home with a gun. And she hasn't done that. She hasn't approached you in your car. She hasn't approached you. They live in the same town. She hasn't approached you at the grocery store. She hasn't approached you anywhere. She hasn't physically harmed you. So the judge actually goes on record and says, you know what? This stalking injunction is dismissed because, quote, this reminds me of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. So guess what? Go back to your life, just grin and bear it and carry on. Victoria has been supported by her husband for most of her life, but she finally decides, after having 3 children, all of whom are targeted by the stalker, by Becky, she decides to get a job. She goes back to school. She gets certified as a teacher. She starts a job. And what happens? Becky starts posting again about how Victoria is an abuser and that she's going to harm the children in her class because she's teaching in elementary school. And then she needs to lose her job. Victoria does lose her job because of these posts. Their posts are persistent. They're repeated. Victoria has told Becky numerous times, please stop. Please leave me alone. I feel threatened. I feel harassed. But the court will not protect her. She's forced out of her job. She's forced to resign because of all the rumors and gossip about her being an abuser. So what does she do? She finds another job. This time she goes to the local community center. She loves working with kids. She's got 3 kids. That's her passion. But guess what? Becky's persistent. Becky takes back to social media and tells the community center, you are an abuser. You should not be working at this community center. You're putting all these kids at risk. Lo and behold, Victoria loses her position once again. Because Victoria doesn't know what to do, because she still loves kids, she starts a YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel it pertains to children's education. She reads books, children's books. She's just doing anything she can to help kids. But guess what? Becky thinks that's absurd because there's no proof of this whatsoever. But Becky decides, of course, that she shouldn't have her YouTube channel or any way to make a living because she's an abuser. So she starts posting relentlessly on her TikTok, again, about Victoria and her abuse. An online mob flocks to her channel, which is starting to get some momentum finally, and she's canceled. Not only is she canceled, but her friends, her coworkers, her colleagues in the community, the people at the school where she taught, they all turn against her. So finally, after all these losses and all this trauma and this rumor that she can't dispel, even though she said repeatedly, I did not do that. Even her siblings have said, she did not do that. It doesn't matter. She's continued with this lie over and over again. It's called the sleeper effect. If you tell a lie enough, over and over again, people believe it.
People start to believe it, which is actually what's happened.
That's what's happening with you. People are telling lies over and over, and people are believing it. So finally, after years, and by the way, so Becky meets with her mother for lunch, and she tells her mom, Sylvia, she said, Mom, that was great. You know, you allowed me to see quite clearly that because of free speech, I have a lifetime pass. I have a lifetime ticket to just ridicule and threaten and harass this friend of mine who didn't do enough for me and who rejected me. And she thanks her mom and says, wow, this has just been great. Free speech is so great. I love it. And oddly enough, Sylvia says at this lunch, Sylvia says, you know, I've been watching this and, you know, maybe it's too much. Maybe you've gone too far. Maybe you should really rein this in a little bit. But Becky says, no, Mom, you taught me free speech. Like I can say any damn thing I want. I'm not stalking her. I haven't showed up at her home with a gun. I haven't followed her in a car. I haven't followed her at the mall. I haven't followed her in a restaurant. I've done nothing wrong. I can say whatever I want. Free speech. So the way this ends, and I don't know the final ending, but the way this story ends, the way this thought experiment ends, is that she wakes up one morning in her bed. Distraught. And she tells her husband that she can't keep doing it. Okay, let's take this out. The way this ends is Victoria is in her bed, crying. She wakes her husband up and she tells him that she can't keep doing it. She's decided that she can't go any further. And she's thinking about killing herself. What happens after that, I don't know. That's the end of the thought experiment. I don't know what she did. But she wakes up at that point because she realizes that Becky's not going to stop until she's completely ruined her life or she's deceased. Because Becky understands that by hiding behind this argument of free speech, that she has a lifetime ticket to target and harass any person she wants over anything without any repercussions. because of free speech. So my challenge to people with this thought experience, my challenge to anyone is to say to them, if you're a mother of someone, a daughter or a son, if you're a mother, would you recommend that one of your sons or daughters engages in this type of behavior? And if you do, I guess that's your choice, right? Free speech. But I'm curious, I'm curious. Is that a reasonable course of action for a parent to say to their child, or for an adult to say to themselves, I have an issue with this person. I'm going to set up a targeted social media account to harm them. And I will spend the rest of my life engaged in this campaign of harm until I ruin this human being. And even if you argue that that's free speech, that doesn't even consider, because this is a philosophical thought experiment, you have to consider the ethical and moral implications of that behavior. We're not even addressing that. Are there ethical and moral implications to letting your child set up such an account under the auspices of free speech to harm someone else? That's my question. I do want to return to a part of that thought experiment, by the way. And it has to do with the part about going into court and being told essentially that this is just nothing but mean girl stuff. Even though Victoria, in this thought experiment, Victoria has never responded online.
Never.
She's never said anything about Becky. She's never fought back, right? I'm going to go back to the textbook. Stalkers and Their Victims, second edition. Let's consider this whole idea of a cat fight. Here's what Mullen, they have a chapter 11, it's on female stalkers. Here's what Mullen et al. Say about female stalking. Victimization studies, quote, this is on page 136. Okay. Victimization studies indicate that females are seldom prosecuted for stalking offenses, with criminal justice intervention most likely to proceed in those cases involving a male accused of stalking a woman. So this is persistent. Mm-hmm. That many people, including some law enforcement, judges, you name it, they don't see stalking as stalking unless it involves a male. Females are just not prosecuted as much. And that speaks to this issue of the mean girl cat fight thing, right? Mm-hmm. This stereotype that stalking is chasing someone with a gun, and specifically you better be a male, otherwise you're not going to be prosecuted, because if you're a female doing it, it's not serious.
Yeah.
It's a cat fight, right? I'll go on. Quote, put simply, stalking by females is yet to be afforded the same degree of seriousness attached to males who harass. This despite empirical evidence that females are no less intrusive or persistent in their stalking, and that they are no less a threat to their victims. I just want to say on that issue that when it comes to stalking, and this is consistent with the research I just read, there's clearly a sexist bias Males are prosecuted, females aren't. When females engage in this type of behavior, even though they're equally dangerous, the research shows this, that they're dismissed. And you know what's interesting about your situation? I really appreciate the fact that certain men like Colby Ryan reached out to you and said, thank you for that vulnerability. Thank you for that type of raw emotion. But you know what? There's a lot of people that are going to really struggle with that type of raw emotion. There's a lot of people that are going to struggle with that type of a vulnerability. There's a lot of people that are very uncomfortable. And because of that, they're labeling you things like histrionic, right? They're dismissing you because you're a female expressing emotion. This is where the sexist bias comes in. They're dismissing you as not serious, as untrustworthy, right? They're dismissing you as frivolous, as silly, as being engaged in a catfight, as a dispute between mean girls, because you're female. Because the stalker wasn't following you with the gun, it doesn't matter. People can't handle the type of vulnerability and emotion that you expressed on that live for hours. What's the response? It's to call you histrionic. It's to call you a liar. It's to say you're faking. It's to say you're doing it for clicks. You're doing it for attention, right? That's because, and by the way, one of the people saying this because of this was on our show years ago. And I will say this, one of the worst moments I've ever had in 5 years, one of the moments that pissed me off to no end, unlike every other moment on any show I've ever been on, this person was on the show. And somebody, a viewer asked a question of me that was extremely emotional. And I was pondering the question. You could see I was getting emotional. I was going to give one of the best responses I've ever given. And you know what happened? Because this person couldn't handle the fact that I was getting emotional, they cut me off. Yeah. They absolutely cut me off, refused to let me answer because they couldn't handle that emotion in a male, especially in a male, that raw emotion that I was about to express. And I was so angry. If this person wonders why she's not on our channel, you might want to look at yourself. You might want to look at the fact that you cut me off in one of the most critical moments on one of our shows that I've ever had. You might want to look at the fact that people didn't like you. You might want to look at the fact that you spoke over Lauren and myself. You might want to look at the fact that you thought you owned this channel when you didn't. You might want to look at the fact that there was a groundswell of people who despised you. So this idea of female stalkers being frivolous and silly and hysterical and overly emotional, most of the people saying that are males. Mm-hmm. Because they can't handle that type of emotion. They can't handle that vulnerability. So the easy response to that is to point the finger at you and say, you're lying, you're faking. Mm-hmm. The goal is not only to play in this, to fall into the stereotype of that only males are stalkers, only males can be violent. That's bullshit. The goal is to disempower you. The goal is to disempower all females that are stalked by other females. The goal is to make you look irrational. The goal is to make you look weak and stupid and irrational. It's to call you a liar, to discredit you. And you know what it's about? It's about the fact that these people cannot handle vulnerability. It's about the fact that years ago when that person cut me off, she could not handle my vulnerability and my raw emotion, and I'm still pissed. Years later, I'm pissed that somebody cut me off when I was going to answer my question in probably the most vulnerable way I could ever answer a question. Because it was about my son. And it was about JJ. So I say to all the haters who are claiming that you're lying and that this can't be stalking, I say to them, I challenge them to look again and to check their own emotions and to check themselves and their own inability to be vulnerable. Because what they're doing is despicable. And I want to make a comment too. I want to go back to this idea of psychological essentialism where we started, that all people at some level want to see themselves as good people. And that people often take small traits and amplify them, generalize from those traits to define another human being. Remember remember Gabriel, the herder?
Mm-hmm. Gabriel, the 4-year-old herder.
There's a lot of people out there that are mocking your looks, that are making fun of your appearance. And I just want to say on that, I mean, people can, you're laughing about some of it. It's funny, right? Like some of it's roasting you, but let's look a little deeper, right? Like that's psychological essentialism. If you want to disempower a female, the easiest way to do it is to mock her looks and then to say, look, she looks stupid. She must be stupid, right? It's to do the very thing that the 4-year-old was doing to Gabriel, which was to take a particular element, a particular attribute of you, your looks, whatever, your eyebrows, right? And it was to say that because of that, you're a clown. Because of the way you look, that you're silly and you can't be taken seriously, and therefore you must be a liar. And you know what? That's fucking bullshit. And it pisses me off because it is so sexist and it is so demeaning and it is so disempowering of women. And you get it all the time, unfairly. You get it from women. But it's a classic case of psychological essentialism in the sense that you're taking one attribute, your looks, or any female's looks. I'm sure a lot of females out there have gone through this. It's taking one aspect, one attribute of you and generalizing to your personality and defining you in terms of that.
Yeah.
And if that's not sexist, then then I don't know what the hell is. But in today's world, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter in the sense that, and it's not. By the way, you're so used to it, it's not going to harm you,
right?
But I think what I want to say is I want the people to be aware of let's call this what it is. When you mock someone's looks, do you really believe that that's defining their personality? Do you really believe that that is a valid perspective on who that person is? That's a valid insight into who that person is? It's obviously not.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. I know that cognitive, I talked about it earlier. I know that confirmation bias and the cognitive response principle mean that no matter what information you give someone, they're not going to change their mind. They're just going to come up with reasons why they're right. I know from confirmation bias that whatever I say here, they already have an opinion. They're going to believe that no matter what. So I'm just putting this out there because I'm trying to complement your 9-hour live with my lesser version of that, my research-based live that analyzes the situation, because you know what? That's what our viewers expect. That's what our viewers like. This is what we do.
At Hidden True Crime.
At Hidden True Crime.
And for those of you that didn't know, because I think a lot of people that are talking about the epic 9-hour live haven't even watched us before. This is what we do here at Hidden True Crime.
This is what we do. I do want to get back to the free speech issue. There's a couple of things I want to talk about at the end here, and then we're going to be done soon. You read this on your live? This is the memorandum.
Yes.
By our attorney, Daston.
This is his reply. This is his reply to their free speech argument. The reply memorandum in support of requests for civil stalking and petitioner's pretrial brief.
I'm going to read some of this because I think it's important, and it's going to reiterate some of the issues we've talked about, especially about free speech. This is from the introduction. Quote, respondent's opposition fundamentally mischaracterizes both the law and the facts of this case by advancing two legally unsupported defenses. Number one, the petitioner's social media presence somehow diminishes her protection from stalking. Think about that. She argued, her attorneys argued that her social media presence, that your social media presence diminished your protection from stalking.
Tell that to Taylor Swift.
So somehow, because you're a limited public figure, and you have a social media presence, never once did you respond to her, by the way, but that diminishes your protection from stalking. And two, that creating multiple social media accounts dedicated to attacking petitioner's character constituted protected, quote, public discourse. Both arguments fail as a matter of law. The evidence before this court, including sworn declarations from multiple witnesses and documented exhibits, demonstrates a calculated campaign of harassment that has caused petitioner, you, to experience suicidal ideation for the first time in her life. As petitioner testified, up until 2025, I have never questioned that before. This has felt like a complete nightmare I can't wake up from, unquote. The dangerous precedent respondent seeks would eviscerate stalking protections for anyone with an online presence and would transform social media into a free fire zone for personal vendettas. The court should reject respondents' attempt to weaponize the First Amendment as a shield for targeted harassment. The First Amendment protects robust public debate and criticism, but it does not protect courses of conduct intended to cause fear or emotional distress, targeted harassment campaigns, true threats, and stalking behavior. This is from Virginia v. Black, 538 U.S., Counterman versus Colorado, 600 U.S. Quote, the First Amendment permits restrictions on speech that threaten unlawful violence or consist of targeted harassment. The most compelling evidence that respondents' conduct constitutes stalking, rather than protected speech, is that the singular purpose of her social media accounts. Respondent has created at least 2 separate social media accounts dedicated exclusively to disparaging petitioner under the thin veil of discussing, quote, an ex-friend. This is not a case where respondent maintains general social media accounts that occasionally reference petitioner while discussing various topics. These accounts were created for one purpose only: to conduct a sustained campaign attacking the petitioner's moral character. When 100% of an account's content targets a single individual, it cannot be characterized as public discourse. It is a harassment campaign.
My attorney is Dastin Dow, by the way. Many people asked. They thought this was really well done. Thank you, Dastin.
The Supreme Court has long distinguished between speech on matters of public concern and purely private disputes. See Snyder versus Phelps. Personal grievances between former friends do not constitute matters of public concern that warrant First Amendment protection when used as weapons for harassment. This is revenge masquerading as free speech. I'm skipping around, by the way.
Yeah. I read the whole thing on my 9-hour live. You're making your points.
The clear intent is to damage the petitioner's reputation and cause emotional distress. Each account creation, each post, and each attempt to expand the audience for these attacks constitutes a separate act in the stalking pattern. The use of multiple platforms demonstrates escalation and obsessive behavior, not legitimate commentary. Here, the numbers speak for themselves. 50 plus posts and videos about you, petitioner, over a 6-month period across multiple platforms. This far exceeds the statutory minimum of, quote, 2 or more acts required by Utah law. Each of these 50 plus posts represents a deliberate choice to continue the harassment campaign. This is not a case of 1 or 2 ill-considered posts in a moment of anger. This is a sustained, deliberate campaign spanning half a year. The sheer volume and duration demonstrate the obsessive nature of respondent's conduct and her intent to cause ongoing distress. The Ragsdale Court emphasized examining the cumulative effect of conduct. A social media harassment campaign creates unique cumulative harm. We talked about this in the research. Permanent digital footprint of attacks, viral potential of expanding the audience, 24/7 accessibility to harassing content, and recruitment of others to participate in the harassment, which she did. Also, the ongoing nature creates the fear of escalation. Respondents' opposition states it is simply not reasonable that Matthias would expect to continually engage in public discussion without encountering speech he disagrees with. This fundamentally misunderstands the reasonable person analysis under Utah Code 76-5-106.5. The proper inquiry is whether a reasonable person in petitioner's circumstances would experience fear or emotional distress from the specific conduct alleged, not whether public figures should generally expect criticism. The Supreme Court in Counterman versus Colorado recently reaffirmed that states may constitutionally prohibit true threats and stalking conduct, requiring only a showing of recklessness regarding the threatening nature of communications. There's a compelling government interest that includes protecting citizens from fear, targeted harassment, and stalking of a compelling nature. The requested injunction seeks only to prevent stalking conduct, not legitimate criticism or protected speech. It is narrowly tailored to serve the government's interest in protecting petitioner from targeted harassment online. The evidence establishes that respondent created a systematic harassment campaign across multiple class platforms, producing 53 plus documented videos and 33 plus Instagram posts dedicated exclusively to targeting the petitioner, which is confirmed by one of the witnesses. This unprecedented volume of content, combined with witness testimony, established the clear intent to harass rather than to engage in protected speech. Respondent published a video with caption, "Without his consent," falsely insinuating the sexual assault of the petitioner's dying brother, who just passed away in March of 2025. The psychological cruelty of this post cannot be overstated. Attacking a grieving sister with false sexual assault allegations about her deceased brother. The respondent posted recordings of petitioner's voice comparing her murderer to murderer Jodi Arias, garnering 33,000 plus views. The events in Boise, Idaho also demonstrate how the respondent's online campaign translated into real-world stalking involving multiple accomplices. He lists those. I'm not going to go over those. You've covered all these. I'm just covering the main points.
What Trisha Griffith said was really good. To mention her.
It is good. I'm just going to finish with this, and then I'm going to finish up with some final thoughts. Each post, each confrontation, each violation represents a separate act far exceeding the statutory minimum, which is two incidents. That's all you needed.
Right, just two.
But more than that, let me just reiterate, her violating the stalking injunction at CrimeCon, that should have been an automatic grounds for enforcement.
Yeah.
And the judge wouldn't even hear it. Respondents' opposition rests on two fundamental legal errors. Number one, the belief that public visibility diminishes one's right to be free from stalking. And two, the claim that social media accounts dedicated to attacking an ex-friend constitute protected public discourse. Both positions find no support in Utah law and would create dangerous precedents. I agree with that, by the way. That if this was dismissed, if we didn't drop this, the precedent here would have been unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. A small court in Provo, Utah, setting a precedent for all kids and adults to engage in unrestricted stalking under the guise of free speech for the rest of their lives. The statutory language is clear and dispositive. Utah Code 76-5-106.5 explicitly prohibits communications, quote, to or about an individual. The legislature did not limit the statute to direct contact. It deliberately included or about to capture indirect harassment campaigns.
To or
about. She doesn't need to speak to you. She just needs to speak about you.
Her attorneys actually specifically left out
about. Yeah.
On purpose, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. Grayson even noted it. And then so did our attorney.
Yeah.
Her attorneys left out some of the case law.
Right. That was convenient. Let's just leave out the case law. Respondents' creation of multiple social media accounts posting 50 plus times about petitioner over 6 months falls squarely within the statutory prohibition. Each of these 50 plus posts represents a deliberate choice to continue communicating about petitioner to third parties, far exceeding the statutory minimum of 2 acts required for a course of conduct. Utah's civil stalking statute protects all persons equally, regardless of their public profile or social media presence. The statute's inclusion of communication about individuals demonstrates the legislature's clear intent to prevent exactly what respondent has done here: conduct an indirect harassment campaign through social media. To hold otherwise would eviscerate stalking protections in the modern digital age and create an untenable legal precedent whereby anyone with an online presence forfeits basic personal safety protection. The evidence clearly establishes that respondent has engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment through multiple social media platforms. This is not protected public discourse. It is targeted harassment using an ex-friend as a thin veil for a personal vendetta. The First Amendment protects robust public debate. It does not protect weaponizing social media platforms to conduct harassment campaigns about individuals through dozens of posts over months. The evidence before this court paints a disturbing picture of calculated, sustained harassment that has driven a professional journalist and mother to contemplate respondents' creation of accounts solely to expose her, quote, ex-friend, her recruitment of others to join this campaign, her physical stalking across state lines, her brazen violation of this court's injunction demonstrate conduct that no reasonable interpretation of law would protect, except Provo courts.
Well, we don't know. We dropped.
Patricia Griffith summarized it best, quote, criticism of someone's work is one thing, but setting out to destroy a person, to incite fear, and to threaten their livelihood is reprehensible, harmful, and flat out wrong.
Thank you, Tricia Griffith.
Thank you, Tricia.
Of Websleuths.
The court must reject the respondent's attempt to weaponize the First Amendment as a shield for what multiple witnesses, including a forensic psychologist, have identified as dangerous stalking behavior with, quote, clear antisocial traits that significantly increase the risk of harmful behavior in the future. We talked about that earlier in this show. Those are the main points. So for those on the side of free speech at any cost, that's what our attorney said. I want to end with, where's my book?
I don't know. You got a lot of books. Which book?
It was over here. Now it's not.
Is it this book under here?
No, it's the, oh, here it is. I got it. All right, here we are. How long has this been going on?
Not 9 hours. What?
How
How many?
4 hours.
4 hours. All right.
4
I
hours.
thought it would be around 3, but we far exceeded that. 4 hours. So think about that. I'm less than half of your epic marathon.
Yeah.
I want to go back to this idea of a moral crusade and how important that was for this campaign. And I want to talk a little bit about, so one of the things I've been doing is revisiting the Salem witch trials, the historical record, and also Arthur Miller's interpretation in The Crucible.
Okay.
I think there's no doubt that the Salem witch trials were a moral crusade because they were obviously, the community was engaged in a smear campaign against specific individuals that they deemed to be witches. Of course, there were no such thing as witches. It was a moral crusade because it was based in the puritanical, religious, and spiritual worldview of the community. So the basic idea was that if you find witches that don't exist, that you purge them, you eliminate them, right? And that's the same thing we saw in Daybell, by the way.
Yeah.
Group of people that called themselves the, what do they call themselves?
Dark. Oh, the Seven Gatherers.
Seven Gatherers, right. Which, not ironically, is the same label that this group uses to describe themselves. Similar dynamics, but in the book, this is the Penguin Classics version of The Crucible. There's an introduction by a literary critic. His name is Christopher Bigsby. Bigsby does a brilliant job of summarizing the critical motivations in The Crucible, also a moral crusade. 19 witches were hanged, 2 dogs were killed, and 1 person was crushed to death during the Salem witch trials in 1692. I'm going to read this line from the critic. because I think it's absolutely relevant to this discussion. And I think it's a good way to end in thinking about all the motivations that this smear campaign involved, all the people that believe they have the moral authority to vilify you and dehumanize you, right? Just like they did in Salem, Massachusetts. Like, has the world really changed in 350 years? Has the world really changed that much?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm going to read this. In his hands, meaning Arthur Miller's hands, quote, this is from the introduction, quote, in Arthur Miller's hands, the ghosts of those who died have proved real enough. Even if the witches they were presumed to be were little more than fantasies, conjured by a mixture of fear, ambition, frustration, jealousy, and perverted pride. That's exactly, I couldn't say it better. Those are exactly the motivations that fueled this smear campaign. Those are the motivations that fueled vilifying you, dehumanizing you. Let me read it again. The witches were presumed to be little more than fantasies conjured by a mixture of fear, ambition, frustration, jealousy, and perverted pride. Why fear? Why fear? Because I think you pose threats to people's identities. You pose threats to their self-esteem. You may have posed threats to their businesses. Not from anything you did.
I'll say I didn't.
Not from anything you did. Just from running our channel, from producing good art and good content, by getting good interviews, by being a quality journalist, by being an ethical journalist. You created fear. Ambition, because all of these people were competitors. Their ambition to see you as a witch. Frustration. This group was frustrated because they couldn't control you. This group couldn't get you to conform. Jealousy. Jealousy over the quality of your work. Nothing more. Jealousy over the fact that you were growing so rapidly. Perverted pride. That's the pride to control the world. The pride to dominate the world. The pride to control other people. The pride to harass other people, to control them, to intimidate them. And most importantly, I'm going to add with this final thought, the pride to engage in a self-righteous moral crusade against you for no reason other than pure fantasy. That's it.
That's all you got, and I don't really have a watch on. Thank you. It wasn't 9 hours. But you did pretty good.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. You didn't have to take a bathroom break. I did.
That's true. No, I took one.
Okay, you did. Oh, so did I.